Are we live? All right. Well, welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Javier Perdomo. This channel is a place we like to do theology videos, Reformation, apologetics videos, and church history videos. I got that order mixed up there a little bit, but we're live. We're doing it live, so that's okay. With us, we have Adam Linder. How you doing, Adam?
I'm
gonna
doing
plug
well. Thank
your
you,
own channel
Javier.
real quick. Gonna plug your channel.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you wanna give me any street cred, it's just under my name now. I changed it. It's not Scoop Group anymore. It's just Adam Linder. My channel is dedicated to Christians who suffer with their mental health. So if that's you, or you know someone who suffers, or you need help and resources, come hang out.
Cool. Yeah, we'll see. We might, for this live stream, we might or might not have a bunch of other guests that might be coming on, because we invited several of our buddies who I think most, if not all of them, have been on the channel before. But I know people are still getting off work and stuff. So if people hop on, it would be much later. If not, Adam and I will be your lovely hosts for today. Everybody that's in the chat. All right, let's say hi to people before we get started. What's up, guys? What's up? Let's see. We're going to be discussing the question in a little bit of whether Christians and Muslims worship the same God. I see we already got people weighing in with the spoiler alert response that we're going to be giving as well. We got, hold on, let me scroll back up here. Hey, we got Catholic Christian in the chat, maybe. I don't know if you're still here, but if you are, good to see you. Look at that. Now you caught one of my live streams, so there we go. We flipped it around this time, so that's cool. And we can touch on that question here when we get started in a little bit. What's up? Nate says, do Muslims believe that Jesus is God? If not, then no, do not believe in the same God.
They're all doing our work for us in the chat.
Yeah, they all pre-watched, someone leaked her notes to people. So, all right. Oh, we got Practical Christian Lessons in the chat, Josh. Josh is also one of our potential guests. We just didn't know. We found out right now that we got confused with the time zone. So unfortunately, he is not sure he'll be able to make it, but I'm glad he's here. All right. Thank you for the kind words, guys. Guys, do me a favor, go ahead and like this video if you're here watching this. Make sure to do that, because it actually lets the algorithm know that people appreciate the video, that it should be shared around more. You'll also see, because this is our my 5K subs celebration live stream. We're going to have a chill discussion here, but we are celebrating the channel reaching 5K. We do also have a goal, I believe, if I set it up properly, for super chats. So if you guys would like to show your appreciation for the channel, maybe help pitch in a little bit with monetarily with a gift there through your super chat, we would really appreciate it. And we have a goal there. If we reach it, we'll each share, I don't know, fun fact about ourselves, a cool skill that we have, or something, something.
I will reveal any information about myself that isn't incriminating. I will answer any question that I don't deem that will get me in trouble.
There you go. That was ominous, but we will. So, all right, guys. Well, we got 23 people watching. I am not the biggest fan of when live streams wait like 20 minutes to get to the topic of the of the live stream. So we'll probably just give it a couple more seconds and get started here. Before we do, Adam, how was your day? Preparing, studying day and night for this live stream.
Yeah, I worked a 12-hour shift, and then I've been up since, and now I'm here. So I'm a little worn out, but I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Same. I've been doing a bunch of research all day for, stuff related to this question. Most of which I was telling you beforehand, I won't be. Most of it I likely won't be sharing on this stream, because I'm still trying to organize my thoughts and do a much better structured video, putting a bunch of it, on paper. But all right, guys. So we got 26 people here in the chat. So I think we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm not sure for how long we're going to go. I guess we'll see where the conversation and where the night takes us, I guess, here on this live stream. So what we're going to be talking about, guys. So we're going to talk about, if I can pull up here, let me pull up Vatican II so I can put it on the screen. So the reason why we're discussing this question of do Muslims and Christians worship the same God is because of the relevance that it has for our ecumenical discussions, for our debates with our Roman Catholic friends, in particular because one of the councils that our Roman Catholic friends held that they believe is infallible is Vatican II. And so Vatican II, let me see if I can pull it up here. All right, this is one of the documents from Vatican II. Hopefully everybody can see that. Let me go ahead, actually. I'll zoom in so we can all see that a little bit better. All right. Can we all see that? Yes. All right, good. So Vatican II, all right, that says a lot of different things, a lot of things that have been found scandalous by even Roman Catholics themselves. It has led to situations like even a lot, well, I say a lot, but a lot, I guess, here is relative. A non-zero portion of people, okay, becoming sedevacantists, saying that the See of Peter is empty. So these would be individuals who affirm that the papacy is a divine institution, who would believe even in papal infallibility. I believe all, if not most of them. But they would see a lot of the stuff that came after that as being very problematic, to the point that they think, sedevacantist would, that the church that they believe in, they love, is actually it's been taken over practically, right, by a false pope and so on and so forth. Obviously, that is not the average Roman Catholic. It's nowhere close to the average Roman Catholic, but that's just to help illustrate how big of a deal a lot of the stuff that was said at Vatican II was. And even among those who are actually still in communion with the Pope to this day, you have a lot of people who don't like Vatican II, a lot of the traditionalists and a lot of these sorts of SSPX type groups that are not going to say that this, that they hate the council or they're going to stand against it or anything like that, but they're clearly not big fans. And so the reason document today on the Vatican website is that there's a part here that speaks about other religions, speaks about Muslims. There we go. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just pull it up here. There we go. Muslims. All right. So it says, okay, the church regards with esteem also the Muslims. They adore the one God. They adore the one God. Adore here. We've looked it up. I wish I had it pulled up here. Probably should have. Preparation for the stream. The word that they use for adore means latria, right? So I mean, they use this word in the same way as they would latria, right? So they're worshiping, right, in the highest sense of the word, the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. They take pains to submit wholeheartedly to even his inscrutable decrees, just as Abraham, with whom the faith of Islam takes pleasure in linking itself, submitted to God. Though they do not acknowledge Jesus as God, they revere him as a prophet. They also honor Mary, his virgin mother. At times, they even call on her with devotion. In addition, they await the day of judgment when God will render their deserts to all those who have been raised up from the dead. Finally, they value the moral life and worship God, especially through prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. And then it goes on from there, right? So again, here we have the church not only regarding with esteem the Muslims, but we're specifically told that they adore the one God. You'll see the capital G here on God, right? The one God who lives and subsists in himself, who's merciful, who's all powerful, the creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. And we're even told not only that, but that they take pains to submit wholeheartedly, okay, to his inscrutable decrees, just like Abraham. And so, again, a very, very high view here, it seems, of the Muslims and the God that they adore. In fact, again, Roman Catholics, because of the language that is being utilized here, have made it really clear that the Muslims worship the same God as Christians, right? The same God as Roman Catholics do. And so this is their position, okay? Now, this creates, as we'll argue in a second, a whole host of problems, and we'll talk real quick here about the problems that this poses for one of the meme arguments that you see thrown out by Pop Catholic Apologist here in just one second. But before we do that, Adam, so when you read this passage, I know it's not the first time you read it. We read it a
Yeah,
whole bunch.
not at all.
What are your impressions of this passage? What like jumps out to you? Maybe you want to recount like the first time that you actually read this or found out that Roman Catholics are bound to believe this. What are your impressions here?
Sure, and I think it's worth noting that you and I exist in this space in fairly different capacities. I typically act in a more sort of pastoral role, addressing people's internal concerns and how things affect the day to day life, and you're a little bit more in the polemic space. And when I read something like this, I'm immediately struck with pastoral concerns of what message does this communicate to the lay person. And I recognize, like, not all magisterial documents are written and designed for the lay person to read and analyze. I recognize that, but I'm immediately struck with concern as to what message does this send to the clergy, and how does that trickle down into the laity. What is the pastoral benefit of a document like this? What is it accomplishing? What is it achieving for the actual church in terms of clarity? Does it cause more confusion? Does it cause certainty, peace, whatever? My knee-jerk reaction is that this is, by its wording alone, cause for concern of the Roman Church's magisterium causing more confusion than actually clarifying anything, regardless of what the content of this is actually getting at. I think it's worded in a way that's just really harmful to the conscience of the church, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting, right? Because and we'll talk about here in a second where the more nuanced like Roman Catholic position ends up being on this. Uh, but the issue here is that this really does tend for the average person, right? I think the average Roman Catholic who just reads this at face value, I think it can lend itself toward indifferentism. It can lend itself toward syncretism and the like, right?
Yeah.
Even though obviously I understand the Roman Catholic Church has all sorts of documents talking about how bad indifferentism is and this sort of thing. I think that from a pastoral concern sort of perspective, you're right. It lends itself in that direction. I think it's very easy for people to read this, and not only to read this, but to read declarations from the popes after this time, or rather, to hear or read statements from the popes after this time in their interactions publicly with
Yeah,
Muslims. Oh, we got Cameron joining us. What's
there
up,
he
Cameron?
is.
Cameron's been
Howdy,
on the channel
I
before.
cannot speak right now. There's a train.
All right. Yeah, Cameron's out in public, but he made it. He made it. It's all that matters. So we're reading Vatican II right now, Cameron, and talking a little bit about the pastoral concerns with the wording of it and stuff there. So again, for anyone that's been following, especially popes after Vatican II, and the way that they interface with individuals of other religions, very infamously, Pope Francis has a lot of moments like these, but it's not just him. There are other popes outside of him who have similar moments. We'll hear things that, again, sound like indifferentism, or they sound like, almost like, what does it matter? We're all following our own flavor, our own path leads us toward God, sort of thing. And lest people think that, again, I'm straw manning here about these concerns, I would point people to, I'll read a few examples here. Pope Francis, in his interreligious youth meeting in Singapore, this is a speech delivered to youths of different religions. He said the following, quote, "One of the things that struck me about all of you here," he's talking about the youths of other religions, he says, "is your ability to engage in interreligious dialogue. And this is very important, because if we start to fight amongst ourselves and saying, my religion is more important than yours, my religion is true, yours is not, where will that lead us? Yes, it's okay to discuss, because every religion is a way to arrive at God. Sort of a comparison and example would be sort of how there's different languages to arrive at God, but God is God for all. And if God is God for all, then we're all sons and daughters of God. But my God is more important than your God. Is that true? There's only one God, and each one of us is a language, so to speak, in order to arrive at God. Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, they are different paths." And that's from Pope Francis at this interreligious meeting. I think that this sort of stuff is very scandalous, right?
Beautiful.
It's hey, Cleave to Antiquity, their first super chat of the night. help Javier get to his super chat goal so he can give us more live streams. Thank you for that, Ben. Thank you for Cleave to Antiquity. Everybody, make sure to sub to Cleave to Antiquity's YouTube channel. Also, if you're here and you haven't done so already, he puts out great stuff. We just did a live stream together last night. So make sure to check him out. And yeah, if you guys would like to help support the channel, make sure to help us reach our goal with the super chats. But yeah, so what do you guys think? I'll read probably a couple more quotes here before we move on to the next thing. What do you guys think about that quote from Pope Francis? How does that strike you?
Yeah, it was great. Fully agree with it. No, I mean, this is the danger of this sort of rhetoric, right? Is that even if it is true, which I'm not granting it is, but even granting that, it is the case that the major motivation for making the claim, yes, you can say, well, it's an affirmation of the truth of natural theology, sure. But in general, the reason that most people make the claim is because they're trying to push some form of indifferentism. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's not indifferentism, it's ecumenism. There's a comment here to this effect. Well, that sure, I mean, that might work with, traditions that actually do worship the same God, namely Western Christians, Protestants, and, other Christians to that effect. But, certainly, we don't do ecumenism with Muslims because, per no definition are they actually really a church. I mean, I understand, from the Orthodox, from the Catholic vantage point, we are merely ecclesiastical bodies ourselves, but, we're certainly closer to being true churches than, a mosque is, we at least baptize people. We at least affirm the truths of the Trinity. None of that is true of the Muslims. And so, yeah, I think that the only real justification for using this sort of language would be indifferentism. You could say, well, it's to affirm the truth of natural theology. Well, this is the problem with the natural theology example, is that the natural theology example means that through nature, we are able to come to specific truths that, when they are fully realized, latch on to the triune God, right? It is not the case that if you actually deny that God is a Trinity, which the truths of natural theology do not lead you to do, at best they are kind of indifferent towards that conclusion. But the second that you say that, yes, there is a good case to be made. And we'll get into this more later, but, in general, disagreement, if you want to respect both sides, you should treat disagreements as actually being evidence that you are not talking about the same thing. Sometimes it's true, and this is the point of the sense reference, breaker analogies, is that sometimes you can have, instances in which you are referring to the same thing, even though you don't think that you are. But in general, that should not be our operative assumption. And in general, when that occurs, it's because either there is, some disguise involved, or...
did we lose him?
Yes.
I don't know. We got you. I don't know if it was just me.
Something to that effect. Yeah, I'll end with that. It was long-winded.
No, that was good. It just you froze in my end. So I didn't know if it was just me where I lost you. But yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll discuss that here in a little bit. Catholic Christian says, please bring me up. We'll bring you up here toward the end, because we do have a couple things that we want to talk about. But we'll open it up at the end. If you want to try to come on and discuss, that would be cool. We can definitely do that. All right. In the meantime, yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. And I think part of real ecumenism and having actual discussions is actually understanding the other side, where they're coming from, their theology, where we actually agree and where we can't compromise, right? And where we have to say, hey, listen, you guys, you're a part of a different religion for a reason, right? And we actually cannot assent to the following things, or we think that you serve a different God for the following reasons. And we can discuss that further here in a second. I want to read one more quote to you guys, and you guys can find this on the Vatican website, on the papal encyclicals. It's on Vatican.va if you guys want to go there and look this up. This is from Pope John Paul II at the end of his visit to Wadi al-Qarar in Jordan. I believe it's titled Jordan, Prayer of the Holy Father. And so after he's been invited over here, he has a mixed crowd of Christians and other faiths. And so he's gone ahead and he's prayed. And then at the end, Pope John Paul II says this. He says, I wish to thank everyone who has taken part and all who helped in the organization. A special word of thanks goes to the patriarchs and bishops, the priests, the sisters. It has been a moving experience to celebrate with the Catholic community of Jordan, and I cordially greet the representatives of other communities who have come from many other parts of the Middle East. I am grateful to you all. He says, I feel especially close to the children and young people. Know that the church and the Pope put great trust in you. All right, good so far. Then notice what he says here when he starts giving his thanks. Special greetings to His Royal Highness, Prince Mohammed. I will keep all the people of Jordan, Christians and Muslims, in my prayers, especially the sick and the elderly, right? All good. Then he says, with gratitude, I invoke abundant blessings upon His Highness the King and upon the whole nation. God bless you all. God bless Jordan. And then he says, may Saint John the Baptist protect Islam and all the people of Jordan and all who participated in this celebration, a memorable celebration, end quote. And so here we have another example, which is very unfortunate, of another pope, not just Pope Francis, saying, publicly proclaiming, again, we're not going to pretend this is like an ex cathedra statement or anything of the sort, right? But still, this is a pope going on a public prayer at a public event, talking to people publicly from a mixed religious crew. And he says, may John the Baptist protect Islam, especially our Roman Catholic friends who would simply say, hey, praying to a saint is like asking the saint to pray for you. We would just simply ask, well, why is he asking a saint to ask God to protect a false religion? And that's very problematic. Adam, is there anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, I think it just further demonstrates the concern I voiced originally. Just if this document, which all magisterial documents in their essence are designed to clarify and cultivate and state the position of the church, when something magisterial like this is written, published, put out, and is given binding authority, the fruits of what follow from it are a testament to the effect of the language itself. So when we see a document supposedly carrying magisterial authority promulgating language like this, again, to me, it just continues to demonstrate that the supposed function of the papal magisterium isn't working. It's not functioning as it's designed to, because instead of promulgating truth, it's introducing all this confusion and opening the door for this idea that in the deepest, truest essence, all nuances removed, these are separate religions. Rome either has to admit that or deny that at the end of the trail of breadcrumbs. And if these documents are promoting things that create these sort of erroneous conclusions, it just demonstrates to me that the magisterium's intent is failing within the Roman mind, within the Roman system, I should say.
Yeah, it's very problematic. So I guess let's just try to lay out, if we can, like a very simple version of our Roman Catholic friends' position on this matter. Let me go. Oh, before we do that, thank you. Where is it? Thank you, Pip, for the $5 super chat. If you guys want to help us reach our goal, make sure to keep putting those in the chat. He didn't even say anything. So just thank you. Thank you for that, Pip. All right. Yeah. So our Roman Catholic friends here, and I think Cameron was laying this out earlier, they would say that there are, and again, Catholic Christian and other Roman Catholics, if you're in the comments, feel free to correct me if I got anything wrong, as I'm sure you were going to do. So they would say that, well, Muslims are able to look out at nature. They're able to, from nature, figure out things like God is pure act, God is eternal, there is a creator of everything. And so on and so forth, right? And so they're able to figure out these divine attributes. And so because they're able to figure out that there is, in fact, a creator, because they're able to figure out some of the attributes of this creator, then that means that they are actually, when they worship, that they have as the reference of their worship, that they're directing their worship to, that they do, in fact, have the God who is the creator of all things, who is pure act, who is the God of Abraham, and so on and so forth. Would you guys say that is I know that was a very basic, quick encapsulation. Would you say that is a fair sum up of our Roman Catholic friends' position here?
Yes. That, while there is a difference in sense or the connotations of what they say when they mean God, they are referring to the same entity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so sometimes they will give analogies. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, I guess, try to paint for you guys some of the analogies that they give, and then we'll give some of our thoughts and interact with this a little bit. Some of the analogies that they will give is they will say things like, well, let's say that you're at the bar and there's a guy sitting at the bar who is drinking out of a glass, and he's drinking like a clear liquid. And you tell your friend that you're sitting with, you say, hey, you see that man sitting at the bar drinking vodka? Well, earlier I saw that he, and you tell a story. But it turns out that the man wasn't drinking vodka, he was drinking water. And so you say, okay, well, hey, you had something wrong about your description of the guy. You got some of the details wrong, but clearly you had the same referent, right? We were talking about the guy that was sitting at the bar, right? And so you guys both understood who the right referent was, even though you had some of the details wrong. This is one of the examples that's provided. Another example that's provided is like, well, Aristotle thought that water was an element. He didn't know that water was H2O. And it turns out that Aristotle was wrong. Water is not just this element the way that he thought. Water is H2O. But even in spite of that, Aristotle is referring to water, right? When he talks about the stuff that fills up lakes and that falls from clouds in the sky and so on and so forth. And so, well, there you go. Bam, we can have different differences in the sense. We can even be mistaken about some of the details, and we can still preserve the referent. Before I share my thoughts on that, Adam, what are some of your thoughts there as to where that goes wrong? And then after you, we'll go to Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, I think those examples communicate the problem. And we'll get into this as we go further, but with the various different religions that are actually referenced within Vatican II, we see varying degrees of, I don't want to say overlap, but perhaps on a spectrum, some things are more Christo adjacent than others, I suppose. So the degree to which the similarities of the potential referent, the degree to which those even exist, it gets pretty far away from what we would consider Orthodox Nicene Christianity. So I have real concerns that even if there might be some stronger arguments for certain religious convictions, those are nullified by the fact that to remain consistent with the language of the council itself, they have to make the same claims about wildly different religions that don't have anywhere near as many similarities. But I know we'll get to that as we go on.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Cameron?
I mean, my operative assumption is that disagreement is prima facie evidence that you are speaking about a different thing. What these examples show is that prima facie evidence can be defeated, right? There can be cases in which you are referring to the same thing, under different senses, and perhaps you're mistaken about it. I think the reason why the Protestant shouldn't worry as much about this as I think they're led to believe is that, in general, the burden of proof is on the person who is saying that both sides are actually wrong. I mean, so as an example, if the Christian says Jesus is the God I worship, and the Muslim is like, no, it's not true. I don't worship that God. Then that is good evidence that you are speaking about different things. Now, it is sometimes the case that you could, maybe they actually were. The Peter Parker example is the one that comes up a lot, right? Where it's like, Peter Parker and Spider-Man are the same person. They're the same referent. But, it is true that there are people who are not aware that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And yes, sometimes that does hold. But, the interesting thing about these examples is that we actually know that they are the same entity, right? It begs the question to say that we are speaking about the same entity when we are referring to, the God of Islam versus the God of the Bible. And that's
Absolutely.
the very thing that's up for debate and the very thing that needs to be proved. And so this is why I think the burden of proof needs to be shifted.
And I think you're exactly right. And I think that's easily demonstrated actually. So one of the examples, right, that I just brought up, the guy at the bar that Roman Catholic friends like to bring up. Sorry, we got a super chat here. The man, the legend, says, notification gang, love what you do, Javier, watch you all the time, and also love your Substack articles, very useful. Lord bless you and keep you. Amen. Lord bless you and keep you too. Thank you for the super chat. But yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think we can look at the bar example there, and we can actually give our own parallel example, and very quickly it begins to fall apart. So if we say, well, let's say that all three of us go back in time, and we bring a Muslim with us to the crucifixion, and we point to the man on the cross, and we say, "That is Jesus of Nazareth. That is my God. I worship him. Is that your God? Do you worship him?" And our Muslim friend would go, "No." Right? Now, putting aside the whole Muslim thing about Allah deceived people, about Jesus being on the cross, whatever, right? Take us to a different point in time. He's walking around doing ministry, and we point to him. We do the same thing. The Muslim would say no, that he doesn't think that that's God, that's not his God, and that he does not worship him. And so I would say that prima facie, that should already be that should lead us to have some further questions, okay, when someone says that we do in fact worship the same God, because he's literally telling you, like, no, right? They don't worship Jesus. The Quran has a bunch of verses, including verses supposedly about Judgment Day, where, and maybe I can pull some of those up here in a little bit, where Allah questions Jesus about if he ever told anyone to ever worship him, or to worship Mary. For some reason, he asks him that too, and then he says no on both counts. Right? There are other verses in the Quran where you are explicitly, like, Muslims are explicitly forbidden from believing in the Trinity. I believe it even tells people of the book, quote unquote, right? So Jews and Christians and so on and so forth, to not believe in the Trinity either, right? And so here we have a really big issue, and this is where I would bring up one of the sort of syllogisms that I've been workshopping. And again, guys, it's a chill stream, so take this, everybody at home, as not like the final product. I hope to keep working on this and put out a video that is much more comprehensive on this stuff. But one of the syllogisms I've been working on is the following, right? So if we say, if X is the true God, this is premise one. If X is the true God, then X is triune. Premise two, the being worshipped in Islam is not triune. Conclusion, therefore, the being worshipped in Islam is not the true God. And I know this is where Roman Catholic friends would say, well, what do you mean? They say they're worshiping the creator who's pure act and all of this stuff. What I would point out is that in Islam, we don't have a situation where you have just someone sitting around looking at the created order and just, like the thinker, trying to figure out what God is like and what his attributes are and so on and so forth. What we have is a situation where, from a Christian perspective, Muhammad and his followers are reached out to by what we would say is a demonic entity. And so because there's a demonic entity that is in contact with Muhammad, okay, who is saying, whether it's the instances where this was a demonic entity saying that they're the angel Gabriel and they were sent by Allah, or there are other instances, including I might get the name wrong. I think it's the night of the passage or something along those lines. People can look this up, where Muhammad actually directly interfaces without intermediary with this demonic entity, with Allah or whatever, the one that's telling them not to be Trinitarians and saying all this other stuff, right? And it is to that being that they are assigning pure act, they are assigning eternality, that they're assigning all of these attributes of God. And so we've had, for example, from our good buddy Cleave to Antiquity, he's brought this up, this example of like the pink elephant example. Like if you have like a drawing of a pink elephant and you point to it and you say, from looking at nature, I've realized that there must be a God who created all things, that he's eternal, that he's pure act, so on and so forth. And then they point to the pink elephant and they say, but I worship this pink elephant. Is this person worshiping the one true God? Now, the response that we often hear is, well, of course not, because the pink elephant isn't immaterial and it has other things that prevent it from being the one true God. But funnily enough, that is partially our response, right? As we say, well, when the Muslim points, well, I guess they're not actually pointing, they're just reading the book all these years later. But I guess when Muhammad, right, is having a conversation with Allah or whatever, and points at him or something like this and says, this is the one true God who is pure act, who is, we got Samuel joining us. What's up, Samuel? So if Muhammad points to this demonic entity and says, this is the God who is pure act, who is the creator of all things, and so on and so forth, we would simply say that he is assigning these divine attributes to someone who is not God. And so he is now committing idolatry, right? And this is the issue. What would you guys say to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And the standard retort here would be, well, it's contradictory. because none of these attributes latch on, right? The pink elephant just has none of the omni attributes. Well, let's just say that you think it's all good, right? Is that sufficient to say that this pink elephant is a sensible referent for God? And I would say one of the things that's important here is that from natural theology, we are able to have the same causal definition of what God is. So, and this is a point Aquinas makes, is that from natural theology, the definition of God is kind of a stand-in middle term to explain a series of effects, right? So we notice that there's change in the world, right? And we posit, something that is pure act to explain that change. And then from contemplating what it means to be pure act, we're able to abstract these pure perfections and apply them to God. We're able to get a pretty good picture, right? But we don't actually have a proper definition of God because we can't put him into a genus, right? And so by saying God is pure act, that is, a causal definition. Well, are we able to get a real definition of God? I would say yes, because the scriptures are God testifying to us about his essence, right? And I would say the question is do the attributes that the scriptures add on to the natural theology picture, namely that God is triune, are those essential parts of God? And the answer is yes. And so from this vantage point, from the vantage point of like a real definition, it just is contradictory, right, to say that the God of natural theology is in himself a Unitarian being, right? Because God is necessarily triune. And I would say similarly, the incarnational example, while it's true that God is not essentially incarnate, it is also true that the person of Christ is qualified by the incarnation from that point forward, right? And so if we're discussing God insofar, God the second person of the Trinity, insofar as he is a composite person, right? Definitionally, a composite person is incarnate, right? And so that means that if the Muslims deny the incarnation, they are denying something about the fullness of Christ's person. And so there's another fact that they are denying about God that is at least quasi-essential. And so this is the overall problem, as I see it, is that the proof by contradiction example proves too much, right? Because you are able to actually demonstrate that a lot of things are not genuine reference. And maybe you can say, well, this proves too much for us because we'll end up having to say that like other Christians don't worship the same God. That is worth getting into, and maybe we will later in stream.
Well, and something that I think here is very important is that it is not just that they are denying truths about the one true God, but that they are mapping whatever little light they were able to figure out from nature. They're then mapping those onto an imposter, and so this becomes a problem, right? So I'll give this analogy, right? So imagine, right, everybody at home. So imagine that you receive an email from someone claiming to be Mel Gibson, right, the director of your favorite movie, Passion of the Christ. And so the message asks you to donate $500 to help fund the Passion of the Christ 2. And so, you're trusting that this really is Mel Gibson and you're moved by admiration of his first movie. You make the donation. But later you discover that the email came from a scammer impersonating Mel Gibson. The money went not to Mel, but went to the scammer. Who in truth did you give your money to? It wasn't Mel Gibson, right? And so even if you intended to give your money to Mel Gibson, in this case, right, the analogy being that whatever this demonic entity is that is interfacing with Muhammad says that he's the God of Abraham, he's impersonating the God of Abraham. In any case, when Muhammad and Muslims after him worship the entity that has been in communication with Muhammad, okay, this is the equivalent to you giving the guy impersonating Mel Gibson $500. They're giving their worship to an entity that is not the one true God. And so who are they giving their worship to? Who are they giving their, I guess, in this case, for the sake of this analogy, instead of their monetary sacrifice, who are they giving their spiritual sacrifices to? They're giving them to an entity that is not actually the God of Abraham, right? And so what do you guys think about that analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's apt, and I think too an additional problem that this creates when we try to pin down like what is the sort of bare minimum requirement for whatever entity that it is in question for the reference still be the same. Someone actually rightly pointed this out in the chat, that it's kind of this ever expanding list that will ultimately, as far as I can tell, it's, maybe this is a slippery slope. Someone can call me out if they want to, but as far as I can tell, it leads to a sort of universalism, that anyone who believes anything whatsoever that has some concept of creator, creation, distinction, in some way, shape, or form worships the one true God. Because there's some trail of breadcrumbs that you could follow, and this is going to include Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, the various modalistic, tritheistic, various Christo-adjacent cults and heresies as well. It sort of just opens up into a meaningless, infinite degree of various things someone could subscribe to and still be claiming to worship the one true God. It just kind of collapses on itself, as far as I can tell.
Samuel, since you haven't gotten a chance to speak yet, is there anything you want to add to that?
I suppose the only thing that comes to mind and that I would add is that I think that there is a relevant difference between abstracting from a consideration of the plurality of persons in God and considering him as a singular divine essence, right, under the aspect of a first cause, versus, intentionally denying that aspect of God, right? So I think that there is a significant difference between abstracting from the consideration of God as Trinity and then denying that aspect of God as Trinity. And I think, as Cameron pointed out earlier, once you're actually rejecting the notion, right, not only presenting from or abstracting from it, then I think, as Cameron pointed out, the burden of proof would be then on the papists to argue, why is it still the same entity in that case?
Yeah, especially because, again, here we have, when we're thinking about proper names, whether it's just God, Yahweh, Allah, or whether it's God of Abraham, and so on and so forth, we not only have the cluster of characteristics, okay, that we're mapping onto, the cluster of concepts that we're mapping onto the referent that we're trying to get to, right? So we have the clusters of descriptions, but then we also have a causal source of the cluster of descriptions, okay? And I would argue simply that for the Muslim who believes that Muhammad is the greatest prophet of Allah, and so on and so forth, and they look at everything through the lens of Muhammad's encounter with the supposed angel Gabriel and with Allah and all these things, okay? Because of the differences in the clusters of descriptions, whereas they would say that this God is Unitarian, that he is not a father, that he doesn't have a Holy Spirit, and so on and so forth, right? So now they have wrong clusters. And on top of that, they have a wrong source, causal source, that brought about those clusters, because they have an imposter, right? They have an imposter demonic entity that is saying that they are the one true God. And so when you put both of these things together, I think it really presents a real challenge to saying that they have the same reference as we do. So, all right, let's see here. Let's see if we can go through some of the comments that people have been leaving here. Let's see. Someone says, Cameron, you keep pointing to Jesus instead of what the same God statements actually refer to. You're going against a caricature of the argument. What would you say to that, Cam?
No, I don't think that's true. I'm making a distinction between a real definition and a causal definition. But regardless, the point I'm making is that that's always good prima facie evidence, right? That we are referring to different entities. Now, I understand the retort is that, well, they actually do have the same referent. What I'm claiming is that begs the question. I'm not actually making all that strong of a claim here. I think there might be, somewhat like maybe you could actually make a decent argument, right? That, Muslims and Christians actually worship the same God. What I'm claiming is that is always going to be pretty good evidence that we are dealing with different referents. And it kind of begs the question to say, oh, well, we are referring to the same referent because there's like common themes or there are abstract properties that are the same between the two. And it's like, I just don't think that that's sufficient, right? Especially when the divergence actually becomes rather large, right? I don't think it passes the smell test. And so what I'm saying is that the burden of proof is on the Roman Catholic here. I don't think that I have the burden of proof. All I'm claiming is that, if a rather strong claim like, I worship an incarnate God, right, is made, and someone says, I abhor that, I find that, terrible, I can't agree with that at all, then yes, I think that your operative assumption should be that you are dealing with two radically different entities.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, something else that we need to keep in mind here is one of the worries that I have about this sort of Roman Catholic thing, and here we can get to how this interacts with some of the other apologetics considerations and arguments that they put forth, is I thought one of the main reasons, or one of the main responses our Roman Catholic friends give to the concerns that Protestants put forth about worship of Mary and the saints is they'll say, well, we're not worshiping them because we don't assign divine attributes to them. But then the way that they argue here, when it comes to assigning divine attributes to the entity that spoke with Muhammad and so on and so forth, that would lead me to ask the question, well, wait a second. So if someone can assign divine attributes to a demonic entity, and yet you say, well, but in reality, they were trying to worship the one true God, so they're worshiping the one true God, I would just ask, well, so is there ever even a case where you could have Marian idolatry, for instance? Like, what if someone said that Mary was omnipotent and eternal and so on and so forth? Would you just say, and then they worshipped her? Would you just say, like, well, but that's still not Mary worship, because they actually were worshiping the one true God, because Mary's not actually infinite, she's not actually, and so on and so forth. I feel like that seems to me to undercut one of their responses on a different apologetics issue. What do you guys think about that? Don't everybody go at once.
This would be my colleague's area of expertise as opposed to mine, so I'll kindly allow them to speak.
Cameron or Samuel, if you guys want to take that.
Yeah, can you re-ask the question? I'm finishing up some work, so
yeah. So with when it comes to Mary,
among other stuff, but continue.
Yeah. Well, so our Roman Catholic friends essentially will say that, well, one of the ways that they'll get around the Mariolatry concerns is they'll say, well, we're not worshiping Mary because we don't assign divine attributes to her. But I'm left wondering, like, well, but if their response here on the do Muslims and Christians worship the same God issue seems to hinge on, well, even though Muslims are assigning divine attributes to this demonic entity, by simply identifying the divine attributes and trying to worship the divine attributes, their worship maps onto God. So they're actually worshiping God. I'm left wondering, like, is there even a situation where anyone could worship Mary? Right? Like, or even if someone attempted to do that and assign all divine attributes to Mary and then worshipped her, would they simply say, well, actually, that worship maps onto the one true God because they were trying to worship God?
Yeah. So, like, I think we got into this earlier, but my overall take would be that if that is the criteria, then the only case in which that would hold, right, is where you are explicitly aware that Mary is not God, that you still worship her anyways. That is to say, you still lean on her above all things, and you maybe even sacrifice to her, right? And you do that with full knowledge that she's not that, then yes. But if you are under the impression that Mary is God, right, and you offer all those things, or at least you should be under the impression that Mary is God, then yes, that is a reasonable point of divergence, right? That that yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but yeah, I'll Samuel, do you have anything to add there?
No, not on that point.
So, all right, we got another super chat. Alex, thank you for the $5 super chat. Alex says, how wrong are you allowed to be before it's a different God? That's a good question. I would say a couple of brief thoughts here, and then I'll put it up for the rest of the panel as well. So a couple of brief considerations here is, I would say, part of the question, part of the problem here is, in what way is the person in question being, quote unquote, wrong, right, about God? And so here's what I mean by that. So let's say that you have someone who is like a child, okay? And the child is like, yes, I believe in God, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. but they're a little child, and so they don't know how to properly explain the Trinity. And let's say that, like, if someone pushed them, the little child would give a modalist explanation for the Trinity. We would say that that child would be a material heretic, right? The material of the stuff that they're saying would be heretical for the explanation, but they're not a formal heretic. They're not intending to be wrong about the Trinity. They just don't know how to fully express it or put it into words, right? And so they retain the same referent. With the Muslim, we have people repeatedly explaining what the Trinity is to them, and then they will say, "Ah, yes, the Trinity," and then they deny it, right? Which would be formal heresy. And so, yeah, I think again there's a distinction there, especially when you couple that also with then the Muslim having this other demonic entity they're in contact. Then this becomes a much bigger issue than just, let's say, a well-intentioned Christian child or well-intentioned catechumen or whatever, who doesn't know how to fully explain their faith. Any other thoughts, guys, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that relates to what I had mentioned earlier, which is to say that there is a significant difference between leaving out of consideration, right, the triunity of God, or perhaps erring in a like non-malicious way on Trinitarian dogma, versus having an understanding of the triunity of God and then rejecting that as the object of your worship. Right. So, for instance, like I wouldn't say that somebody like Aristotle is in the same position as a Muslim in the 21st century, because, even if you're inclined to say that, well, through the process of natural theology, Aristotle was able to deduce the existence of a first mover, right? And perhaps you can argue that the referent here is God. That would be an instance in which the triunity of God is prescinded or abstracted from and left out of consideration. But I do think that that is different in category for somebody like a Muslim who is presented with the triunity of God and then says, like, no, I am excluding that from the object to which I am giving my worship.
And they pursue a different entity on top of that too.
Right. Yeah. So I think here we have to take into consideration not only what the papists are saying about the Muslims, but about what the Muslims are saying about themselves, right? So if you are speaking to a Muslim and he says, and he himself confesses, the entity which I am worshiping is not triune, right? If he makes that definitive statement, then again, we would have to say that, as Cameron pointed out earlier, then like prima facie, we would just say he is not worshiping the triune God, right? Which, I mean, I'm repeating myself a little bit, so I apologize for being verbose, but I do think that that's obviously different from merely abstracting from the consideration of God qua Trinity.
Yeah. We'll have a super chat from Catholic Christian. $2 super chat is how long do I have to wait to come on? I would say if you could give us maybe like another 15 minutes, I think we can probably have you on for a little bit, just because we have a couple things we want to get to. yeah. 8 hours from now. No, maybe like another 15 minutes, and
if I
we
can
have you on
Javier,
for a little bit.
I think that specifically the question, how wrong can you be? I think that's a question that's more rightly asked of the Romanist. If we're asking, well, how wrong do you have to be? It seems the Roman position, the threshold for wrongness is seemingly endless. As if there is no ultimate threshold, that there's not some trail of breadcrumbs you could follow that would amount to worshiping the one true God by some form of referent. Because obviously we can't tell the intention behind the question. If it's how does the Protestant answer this question, maybe there's some degree of variance on, maybe some of us think a denial of filioque is damnable, or maybe an affirmation of Chalcedon is damnable. Sure, maybe there's going to be some difference, but I think generally speaking, the reformational mind, the Lutheran, Anglican, Presbyterian mind is going to draw the line probably around Nicaea and something like what's articulated there. Whereas it seems the Romanist, when met with the question, how wrong do you have to be? Truth be told, and maybe when our friend can come up, he can clarify this, but I've yet to hear a satisfying answer as to how wrong you can be. It seems as if there is no degree too great that you couldn't follow a trail back to this sort of worship by referent.
Yeah, and if I can give another analogy here to maybe help people understand what we're getting at, um, as to how we end up with different reference. So, okay, everyone, again, another analogy, right? Analogy time. Imagine a murder scene. Okay, so two detectives arrive at the scene. After initial analysis, they agree on some general facts. They agree that a murder occurred. They agree that it happened at night, and they agree that the killer used a blunt murder weapon. So far, they share some truths about the nature of the killer, but then their paths diverge. Detective A becomes convinced that the killer is Susie, and he actively builds a case around Susie. Detective B becomes convinced that it was Jack. Instead, builds an entire case around Jack. Detective A doesn't just lack knowledge about Jack, he explicitly denies that Jack could be the killer and says that he's pursuing Susie for reasons X, Y, and Z. He rejects that Jack is the killer. His entire investigation is oriented away from Jack being the killer. But at the end of the day, it turns out that Jack was the killer. Here's the key question. Would you guys say that both detectives were investigating the same person simply because they got some facts about quote unquote the killer right in the initial investigation? We would say no. Very clearly not, right? We're building cases about two completely different people, two completely different entities. They were, maybe actually interviewing them or interrogating them. And so they were having communication with two completely different people. And yet it turns out that Detective B was correct. It was Jack. He was talking to the actual killer the whole time. But Detective A was not interfacing with Jack. He then talked to anyone that Jack knew. He didn't interview any witnesses that are at Jack's place of work. He didn't talk to Jack and so on and so forth. It would be very, very silly to say, well, but because they were both agreeing on some general points of the case and because they both wanted to catch the killer, therefore Detective A and Detective B both investigated, gave their efforts, sacrificed their time away from their families to investigate the killer, because they actually didn't. They investigated two different people. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
No, I don't have anything to add. It tracks. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cam.
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay. All right. So let me see here what else we wanted to talk about before we bring Catholic Christian up. Another talking point that I think does not interact very well with this talking point of Roman Catholic friends is that our Roman Catholic friends, I made a meme about this that I posted on the channel. They are stuck in this weird place where not all of them, but some of them, both apologists and lay people, most of their apologists are also lay people, I guess. So lay people apologists and lay people non-apologists have said that Protestants do not worship God, right? Because you have this argument they build where they're like, aha, Protestants don't worship God because latria is the highest honor that is due only to God. And the only way that you can give that to God is to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. And they're like, aha, the Protestant doesn't worship God, which there's a lot of issues with that that we could explore. But the one that I want to bring up here is that now they're in this weird position where their documents say that Muslims who do not have the Mass, right, who do not believe in a Father, Son, Holy Spirit, who do not believe in the Trinity, who do not have any of this, but the Muslims offer latria to the one God.
Yeah.
Right. And so this seems like a sort of oops moment for the pop apologetics Catholic scene. Anything that the panel would like to add?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say, and maybe this is just in my own anecdotal experience, I've noticed a drop off in the Protestants don't worship God thing. So I'm hopeful it's just losing steam. But this is problematic all the way back into the patristics. I mean, even if you look back to like the Coloridians, I mean, they were condemned for worshiping Mary. And we have to then ask, well, were the Coloridians offering the sacrifice of the Mass to Mary? We don't have any evidence to suggest that that's the case. So there clearly is this concept of worship without this sacrifice of the Mass. So yeah, I mean, just to put it plainly, it seems to me, as far as I can tell, and I'm not the brightest crayon in the box, but it seems to me that one of these two things needs to be dropped. Either Muslims, Jews, any non-Christian doesn't worship God, or Protestants do. It doesn't seem that these things can peaceably coexist without contradicting one another.
Cameron, Samuel, anything you want to add to that? No? All right. No, I think that was well said, Adam. I think at the very least, our Roman Catholic friends should be able to say, hey, you know what? I understand why you guys seem apprehensive toward this idea, because sometimes the response we hear is like, this is preposterous, right? Like, it's like ridiculous. And it's like, no, it actually really isn't, right? I think we can demonstrate this with a bunch of analogies. We've used a couple here. We can demonstrate this with other, I guess, syllogisms and such of similar situations where it's like, well, hey, the reference clearly goes wrong in some of these other situations. So we should, it's okay for us to have some pause here. Something that I want to show us really quickly, just to help people at home that maybe have not seen this before, and then we'll allow Catholic Christian on here afterward, so we can chat a little bit. Is I want to pull up, just so that everybody can see, in case they're not familiar with them, some of the verses that we're talking about when it comes to Muslims denying the Trinity. So let me go ahead and pull that up. I can do, let's see here. Share screen of Surah. Okay. All right, we're in Quran.com. Let me go ahead and zoom in so you guys can see it better. All right. So here we have Quran 112, verses 1 through 4. And they say, O prophet, he is Allah, one and indivisible. Allah, the sustainer, needed by all. He has never had offspring, nor was he born. And there is none comparable to him. So here we see, obviously, right, a denial that Allah has quote unquote ever had offspring. We hear that Allah is one and indivisible. This isn't even the clearest one, though. This is just like our opener. They have other verses where they explicitly name drop the Trinity and so on and so forth. So let me pull up another example there of that. Let me go ahead and pull this one up if I can. Just 1 second here. Share screen. Having a bit of a boomer moment right now. All right, there we go. So Quran 5:72 through 73. Here's another example. It says, quote, those who say Allah is the Messiah, son of Mary, have certainly fallen into disbelief. The Messiah himself said, O children of Israel, worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. Whoever associates others with Allah in worship will surely be forbidden paradise by Allah. Their home will be the fire, and the wrongdoers will have no helpers. Those who say Allah is one in a Trinity have certainly fallen into disbelief. There is only one God. If they do not stop saying this, those who disbelieve among them will be afflicted with a painful punishment. And so there we have another very explicit account, denial of the Trinity. Oh, we got Samuel's back. And people are being told that if they actually believe that the Jesus, son of Mary, is the Messiah, that he's Allah, that they have certainly fallen into disbelief, right? That anyone who worships him will have their home in hell, according to the Quran, right? Let's do one more example here. Let me pull up just one more example. Hold on here. Where did I put the other one? 1 sec. All right, let's see here. Quran. We did. Let's see this one. 1 sec. Just so that everyone understands that we're not exaggerating here about the Muslims. Let's go ahead and do this final one here. All right, present. While I do this, guys, make sure again to like if you're here. If you haven't liked and shared the video yet, make sure to please do so. If you want to leave us a super chat, we would really appreciate that. Also, let me go ahead and share the screen there. All right, final one. All right, so Quran 5:116 through 118. And it says the following, quote, and on Judgment Day, Allah will say, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you ever ask the people to worship you and your mother as gods besides Allah? He will answer, "Glory be to you. How could I ever say what I had no right to say? If I had said such a thing, you would have certainly known it. You know what is hidden within me, but I do not know what is within you. Indeed, you alone are the knower of all unseen. I never told them anything except what you ordered me to say. Worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. And I was witness over them as long as I remained among them. But when you took me, you were the witness over them, and you were witness over all things. If you punish them, they belong to you after all. But if you forgive them, you are surely the Almighty, all-wise." And so again, yeah, I mean, and the Muslim scriptures couldn't be any clearer, I think, on this issue, right? They reject the Trinity. They reject that Jesus is God. They say that anyone, they have their own sort of scene here that has been demonically communicated to Muhammad, that in the end days, right, that Allah is going to ask Jesus if he ever told anyone to worship him, and he's going to say no. And then, he's going to say, well, if you want to punish those people, you can. If you want to forgive them, you can. But we've been told in the other verses that we just read that those people will not be forgiven, right? We're told that those people would actually go to the everlasting fire, according to Muslims. And so that is the situation that we see there. It's very unfortunate, again, because of, as Cameron was saying earlier, because of divine simplicity, right? God doesn't have accidents. When we talk about the attributes of God, God's essence is identical with those. So God isn't just powerful, right? Like God, or he isn't just all powerful. He isn't just as though that were like an extra attribute that's being super added onto him. God's essence is identical with these things. And so when they say something like, oh, well, God is eternal and pure act, but he's a Unitarian, when they say something like that, that is equivalent to trying to say that you know of a square circle. It's just babble, right? It's a contradiction in terms. It's like saying that you know of something that is both A and non-A, because these are both the same thing. And so that is kind of what we're trying to point out, right? So if you have a buddy who says, let's say, I don't know, if someone says, oh, my buddy Cameron, who's on the stream, is a married bachelor, that sentence is technically a sentence, right, that has been put together grammatically, but it's nonsense. A married bachelor doesn't mean anything. And so you could say, but notice, well, you clearly referred to Cameron anyway. Yeah, but that's because whether he was married or whether he was a bachelor, he can't be both at the same time. That's incoherent. Even if he was one or the other, that would be like an accident of his, right? Like that an accident of him being married or being single or what have you. If someone says that God is pure act and not a Trinity, if someone were to say that, that would be the same thing as saying that, oh, you know of a square circle, you know of a married bachelor living in New York or whatever. There is no reference there, right? Because you're saying that the thing is both A and non-A. And so that's another issue that we end up with here. Let's see here. Catholic Christian, are you still in the chat? Before we have him on, anything else you guys want to add to that?
Yeah. I was going to add, one of the reasons that this is difficult is that, in earthly examples, there's some very, sensible, examples of how something can, I guess you can say, be like a quality across possible worlds that doesn't enter into the definition of a thing. So a proper accident is a good example of this. So, in humans, right, it flows from the essence of rational animality, right, that humans have the ability to laugh, right? But certainly that isn't in the definition of what it means to be a human, right? And the reason that it is difficult, and I think that I wouldn't, completely discount what the Roman Catholic is getting at. My overall point is just that, we need to be rather nuanced in our claims here, and B, I think that we need to also understand that if there is like legitimate disagreement here, even if there is like a historical continuity between the two set of beliefs, that sometimes can lead you to say that no, in the end we actually are speaking about two different entities, right? And that's typically gauged through explicit denials and not, implicit affirmations. So yes, I would say that, I think that the Old Testament teaches that God is a Trinity, right? But if someone argued that that isn't the case, there certainly is not adequate data to say that the God of the Old Testament is not triune, right? And that's all you need to say, as far as I can tell, right? All you need to say is that, the Jewish believer in the Old Testament is not denying that God is a Trinity. They are grasping onto natural theology, and they are grasping onto God as revealed. They don't have every single part of the definition that they need to add on, right? But they certainly are not affirming any falsehood that would challenge the definition as such. Whereas I think in the case of the Trinity, right, there is a certain sense in which the essence is, as Samuel said, something that we kind of abstract to discuss God absolutely or God relatively, right? And that's the point. When we're forming a definition that is relevant to Christian theology, because religious, theology is oriented towards, practical worship of God and receiving salvation from God, then it seems to be the case that we need to actually enter in, the fact that God is triune into that definition, right? We it is specifically the triune God that is gracious to us. It's not some abstract essence. And that's my answer to the earlier question. Am I saying that Jesus is identical to the essence of God? No. What I'm claiming is that, it is a essential fact of God that, there is a second person of the Trinity.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that, Cam. What's going on? Eric from Catholic Christian. If you guys don't know about Eric's channel, we did a sort of like impromptu dialogue / debate that I was able to. We did it on his channel on a live stream where I hopped on toward the end, and I posted it on my channel. If you guys look up like a canon debate or something like that on my channel, you should find it. How are you doing, Eric?
I'm doing well. How are you, Javier? Thanks for having me on.
Doing pretty well. Thanks for being willing to hop on. So how would you characterize the Roman Catholic position here? Do you think that, even if you obviously disagree with our critiques, do you think that we more or less summarized it accurately earlier? And if not, how would you summarize it?
One of the gentlemen brought up a good point. I want to say it was Adam. I don't recall. And he was basically saying, you got to understand the context and why Nostra Aetate.
Can you guys hear him? On my end, he like froze.
No, I can hear him.
Okay, sorry. All right, I can see you now. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, hopefully that's not me, but
no, I can see you now.
He was saying, you really got to understand, like, why was Nostra Aetate written? Why was Vatican II, the Ecumenical Council, convened? Before you even read on the surface level Nostra Aetate, Vatican II, or any other dogmatic constitution, I think it is really important, at least to try, right? I'm not saying you have to agree with anything, but try to understand why these were written. So first of all, Nostra Aetate, right? Anybody knows what that means in Latin? Anybody? I'm not trying to do a gotcha thing.
Is it?
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
Our something. Yeah, but I'm really bad with Latin.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. But you got to know, it's in our age or in our times. But why was this written by Pope Paul VI? This was on the church's relationship with other religions, specifically Judaism and the Jews. And then by concomitance, the Muslims. And then you can kind of branch out there with Hindus, Buddhists, and other religions like that. But yeah, it was really written to kind of get away from the Inquisitions and the anathemas and try to seek out mutual common ground with Jews and Muslims, not through compromise or indifferentism. I know that word floated around earlier in your stream, the indifferentism and syncretism. I can empathize with it. I can empathize with it. I used to be a confessional Lutheran for 20 years. So I'm not, it's not like you guys are all drunk. I get it. Like it makes sense. But, so yeah, like what's interesting, if you read Nostra Aetate, one of your guys super chatted and said, well, how do I know how wrong can I be when it comes to the one true merciful God, or believing and worshiping the same God? Pull up Nostra Aetate. Look at the language it uses. It's right there. How are they explaining the referent of worshiping and believing the same God? It never says anything about Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Just like in Acts 17, when Paul talks about this God, he never brings up the Father, the Son, nor the Holy Spirit. But yet they believe in the same God as Christians, as St. Paul did then, and likewise the Jews of the Old Testament. See, because Hindus, we do not, Vatican II Nostra Aetate does not state Hindus believe in the same God, Buddhists. Here's a question for you guys. It's not a gotcha question. It's not a gotcha question. It's rhetorical. Why would we say Muslims believe in the same God and worship, but not Mormons, when Mormons express the Trinity and maybe by sense the Trinity?
That's a good question. So I would say that the Mormons, funnily enough, I think part of the thing here has to do with whether someone thinks that Joseph Smith was in contact with a demonic entity who was impersonating, messenger of God and so on and so forth, or whether he was just like a liar. Right. So I think either one of those are on the table. But I think if he's in contact with a demon and the demon is like revealing these things to him and so on and so forth, then I actually think our concerns map on there fairly well. We would just say that I think for me, one of the big concerns with Islam is what I was trying to explain earlier, versus something just like, a person on an island somewhere that has never been reached by Christians or anybody, doesn't know what a Bible is. And they look out at the world and they figure out, they're island's version of like an Aristotle, I guess. And they figure out, well, God must be pure act and so on and so forth. I think if that person stopped there and maybe cried out and said like, God, whoever it is that is out there, please help me. Right. Then I think we could maybe say that that person has the same reference. Right. I think part of the issue here is when the person is actively doing two things. One is when they're actively denying the Trinity, they're denying attributes of God even that they've been exposed to. So like someone's told, hey, here God has revealed himself. They're denying that. And then on top of that, they're following either a demonic entity who is saying that they are God, that they have the divine attributes, or they're following an idol that they've concocted in their mind, right? That has all its own lore and goes off and does its own thing apart from the God of the Bible. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add on to this with the Acts 17 example. I think that, the context of Paul's statement should, be taken above and beyond, the overall point he's trying to get across, which is that there is this entity, right, this unknown God, right, that even the Greeks affirmed, that he is saying, well, I actually am identifying that God for you. Yes, I'm sure that there probably were some positive claims that were attached to that God that were false, but that very affirmation itself, right, and the other affirmations that, this is him in whom we live and breathe and have our being, right, that is what I think is being affirmed. And so, yes, like per my earlier analogies of like pointing at Jesus, and saying, oh, I don't worship that God, the Muslim doing that. I don't think that's what's happening, right? I just think that isn't being addressed at all. And I think that when we're dealing with, the philosophy of this issue, we just should not assume that we're wrong from the get-go, right? I would say our operative assumption is that, well, if we disagree, we're probably referring to two different things. And if we disagree on fairly fundamental matters, we're probably disagreeing on pretty fundamental things. But what I think epistemology is doing here is that we're actually trying to figure out, well, why is it the case that sometimes we're mistaken, right? I don't think we should operate on the understanding that we probably are mistaken. That's my overall take. And I want to be clear. When I said indifferentism, I wanted to make a distinction between that and syncretism. I'm not claiming it's syncretistic. I do think that this sort of claim is not particularly helpful in ecumenical dialogue, though. That's my overall take. But I do understand what you're saying. I think that is a sensible way to address the issue, that it was not put forward with like perverse intentions, right? To just completely gut, Roman Catholicism of any like dogmatic weight. I'm just saying I do think the fruits of it, I think they have lended themselves to indifferentism. I do just think that's the case.
Yeah. The only thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a really quick comment to build off of what Cameron was saying. And I had mentioned this earlier. I think like if we were going to use this Acts 17 passage as a comparable example, then hypothetically we could imagine that Paul goes on and then says something to the effect of, and this God is Jesus Christ, right? And then in response to that claim, then you have these people in Athens saying, no, that is not my God, right? Because again, I think that the relevant consideration or concern from the Protestant side is not simply the fact that, again, Muslims don't affirm the Trinity, but it is that when presented with that doctrine, they are rejecting that as their object of worship. So just to reiterate, like, I think if we wanted to make the situation more analogous, you would have, Paul go on to then disclose that this one God in whom we live and move and have our being is actually the man Jesus Christ, right, who was crucified. And then, we have these Athenians saying, like, no, that is not who I am directing my worship towards.
That's a great point. I couldn't have said it better. Let me just say, piggyback on that point. So the Athenians, right, they are worshiping and believing in the Trinity, are they not? Right. Because Paul says, let me proclaim this unknown God to you. So what he's doing is he's taken the referent, okay, because they don't know Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They don't know the Nicene Creed. Obviously, it hasn't been written for 300 years. But if they were to reject what St. Paul were to say, like, hey, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, let me reveal this to you, this supernatural revelation, the referent point is still the same. The referent point doesn't change because their expression, it changes, or they reject that expression that St. Paul would give them. You know what I'm saying? So go ahead.
I don't know. I think so. So two quick things on that. One, I think part of what makes this a very sort of unique situation, which I put it up on the screen so maybe we can read it for people real quick. It's Acts 17 we're referring to here. If we go to verse 22, it says, "Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, 'Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you were very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar to this inscription, with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor does he worship with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives life, he gives to all life, breath, and all things.'" And then he keeps going on from there. I think what makes us fundamentally different is that I think what Paul is doing here, and I think it's clearly seen in the text, is this evangelistic move of saying, hey, you guys seem to have a concept for there is a God out there that you don't know anything about, that you're not aware of. I am here to tell you that is correct. All right. So this God that you've been worshiping as an unknown God, he does exist out there. And he's actually the one true God. Right. And then he begins to explain to them that, their worship is actually really wrongheaded and all these sorts of things. I think that's much more equivalent to the guy that I mentioned earlier, who's like on an island, right, and doesn't know exactly what's going on and says, well, I've been able to piece together that there's a creator, he's pure act, whatever, so on and so forth. And then they stop there and say, well, and on the rest of that, he's unknown. I don't know anything about him, but God, please help me, please save me, right? I think that person, again, is in a fundamentally different place than the person who is actually presented with all of the details about who Jesus is, who God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit are, so on and so forth. And they reject them. And not only do they reject them, but then they begin to ascribe the divine attributes to another entity, right? So if you think about my sort of Mel Gibson example that I gave earlier, if you were here for that, where a scammer reaches out and says, oh, I'm Mel Gibson, you should give me $500 for Passion of the Christ 2. Let's say that you fall for it and you're like, dude, I love Mel Gibson, and you send them $500. Would you say that because you intended to reach Mel Gibson, that you actually gave money to Mel Gibson?
But the referent is different. You have a scammer and you have Mel Gibson. They're two.
But that's what I'm saying. The scammer here is the demon Muhammad's talking to.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Kind
yeah,
of.
Our overall point is that it begs the question to say that you're not dealing with two different referents here, right? It's not that you can't say, well, that there's historical continuity in terms of how Christians come to their belief in God, right? And how Muslims come to their belief in God. I think with the murder example Javier gave earlier, even that isn't necessarily sufficient to say that you're dealing with the same referent at the end of the, investigation. And I think with the demon analogy, the reason it's important is because you actually, it kind of shows that you're not dealing with two different, historical processes that lead to different conclusions. What you're actually having, right, is two different special revelation claims that are being produced through two different mechanisms, and one leads to a fundamentally wrong belief. And our overall contention is that, since we as Christians think that our, the mechanisms that led to our belief are correct, right? It just is the case if the Muslim looks at what we're saying and they're just like, I disagree with this a ton, that I take what they're saying, at face value. And I just am like, well, I don't think what you are affirming actually exists.
Right. Yeah.
I do agree we're sometimes mistaken about that. I agree. But I would just say, my operative assumption is that we aren't. Sometimes we're wrong, but I feel like the burden of proof is on the person who's trying to show that we're wrong.
Well, I've noticed you said the burden of proof like 10 times. We don't have any burden to prove this. This was written to us. This is like one of our documents. This was not written to Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, or anything like that. Like we don't have to go around defending this unless we have to defend it when, or Protestants on a live stream are, rather lovingly discussing this issue.
Lutherans and Anglicans aren't Protestants, So.
Yeah. Well, non-Catholic, non-Orthodox, whatever you want.
I know.
I just wanted to say this though, because you guys keep bringing up like rejecting the supernatural revelation part of it, like the Trinity or Jesus is God, or we could list out that. Well, what they're rejecting is the sense and the expression of who God is and what he is, not the referent point. So if you look at Nostra Aetate, if you look at Acts 17, they don't talk about the Father and the Son being consubstantial, you know what I mean? Or the Holy Spirit proceeding. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit doesn't even get mentioned in Scripture and in Nostra Aetate. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, seriously, we're just talking about the referent. We're not talking about, if you reject the expression or the teaching of the Trinity, but Jew or Muslim, you still believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a referent, that he's one, right? Omnipotent, all merciful, creator of heaven and earth, and judge of mankind at the last day. That is the monotheistic same God by referent. We just believe in different things about that God through sense and expression, namely supernatural revelation. And if you reject that expression, that doesn't mean you believe in a different God. Likewise, in Acts 17, if those Athenians were to say, screw you, St. Paul, it doesn't change that they were literally worshiping the same God. They just they are just rejecting that which is given to them by St. Paul. That's the expression of supernatural revelation, like God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's what they would be rejecting.
So I understand.
Let me ask you a question about Acts 17. So let's say that hypothetically they were to reject Paul's preaching, and time goes on or whatever, and they say, actually, guys, we figured out who the unknown God is, and it's Krishna, right? And they put up like a Krishna statue, and they begin worshiping Krishna, and they have all the lore for Krishna, but they think that Krishna. So would you say that they have the same reference still?
Nope.
Or no?
Nope, that doesn't work, because why? I mean, think about it. In Nostra Aetate, why is it only the Jews and the Muslims? Think about all the religions in the world. Think about the Mormons.
Can I show you something though, real quick from Nostra Aetate? Because I don't know if that's actually correct. Let me put it on the screen real fast.
Can I ask a question really quickly? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask. So I understand your point about how the document itself doesn't bring up the triunity of God, but how would you respond to the concern that the Muslims do? And this is what I mentioned earlier when I said that we don't only have to consider what the Roman Catholics are claiming about the Muslims, but also what the Muslims are claiming about their own worship. So I understand your point that, hey, well, the document never says Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like, fair enough. But then, as Javier pointed out earlier, he's bringing up these verses from their text, which explicitly deny triunity in God. So you understand what I'm asking here?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And that's what I'm trying to get at, because if you read Nostra Aetate, paragraph 3, I'll just read it. says they adore the one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heaven and earth, who has spoken to men. They take pains to submit wholeheartedly even to his inscrutable decrees, just as Abraham, with whom the faith of Islam takes pleasure in linking itself submitted to God, end quote. Everything in there, Muslims will claim as their God. Everything in there, because it says nothing about redemption, says nothing about the Messiah, the Son of God, nothing about the Trinity. Just see, this is right here. This is the referent right here. This is what they claim. This is what they do actually believe. Likewise with the Jews. And that's why Nostra Aetate, we say with the Jews and the Muslims that we adore the same God, but not Hindus or Buddhists. So if you go up in the document, it'll talk about Hindus and Buddhists. And it's just saying that they have elements, not the fullness, but elements of truth and sanctification, right? That we have.
Can I read that section really quickly for us?
How would you distinguish?
Real quick, let me really quickly read the Hinduism section, because that's come up a couple times really fast. Hopefully we can all see it here. So it says, religions, however, that are bound up with an advanced culture have struggled to answer the same questions by means of more refined concepts and more developed language. Thus, in Hinduism, men contemplate the divine mystery and express it through an inexhaustible abundance of myths and through searching philosophical philosophical inquiry. They seek freedom from the anguish of our human condition, either through ascetical practices or profound meditation. I think this part's actually very important. Or a flight to God with love and trust. So they're saying that Hindus within Hinduism, which is what it's talking about, men can actually take flight to God with love and trust within their Hinduism.
Through philosophical inquiry, just like the Athenians in Acts 17. So if you go up back, I don't know, it's the sentence or the two before that, it said, no, not that far up.
Oh, sorry.
Through ascetical practices, profound meditation, but go up one, it says through searching philosophical inquiry. It's just up a sentence, dude.
Yeah, well, so that's what I'm saying, though, right? So that's why I gave the Krishna example earlier. But you said earlier that if the Athenians were to say, we know who the unknown God is, it's Krishna, you said that then they would have a different referent. But now it seems that the Hindus are being said by Nostra Aetate, but they're being said to be able to take flight to God.
Right, but the Krishna analogy falls apart. And I'm not saying it's a bad example. You're asking a question. It falls apart because in Acts 17, read how St. Paul describes the unknown God. Okay, he's not talking about Krishna or a creation or an illusion or some Hindu god. No,
I agree.
He's talking about the God who made the world, everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, all, blah, 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 blah. Those are the things that the Muslims and the Jews believe in. That's the reference. He doesn't even say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Says nothing like that. So you can't just say Krishna. You can't say a pink elephant. You can't say, Pastor Ben's hairline. I said that on his Twitter, by the way. Those are created things. You can't, it doesn't work like that. It's a non sequitur. I'm not saying you're doing a non sequitur. I'm just saying it doesn't apply. It's a category error because you're taking something created and you're just saying, oh, well, I can just claim that that's the referent point. No. The referent point is not. The referent point is the referent point. You can't just pick something out in creation or a different religion and say, well, that could be the referent point, because it's not the referent point. It's
let me give you a hypothetical to help draw out what you're saying here. So let's say that you're a regular Hindu and you're sitting there, and let's say that a demon appears in the, and looking like Krishna does in all their artwork and whatever. And imagine that the demon said, like, I am Krishna. I am pure act. I am the creator of all things. I am uncreated. Like, imagine that she lists all the classical theism, divine attributes. And she says, worship me. And the person then bows down and worships the demon. Would you say that they're actually unknowingly worshiping God?
No, I mean, because that's a demon, dude. That's the referent really is the demon.
What Muslims are doing, though, right?
Wait. What?
I'm saying that's what the Muslims are doing, though, right? So this is the equivalent.
They're not worshiping Krishna, dude. They're not worshiping
Krishna. No, but they're worshiping a being that appeared to Muhammad and spoke with Muhammad and interfaced with him several times and claimed that he was the God of Abraham. And so this is a demon that they are worshiping. And so that's what we're saying, like, because you have a demon that is then saying that he is Allah, that he has all these attributes, so on and so forth, denies the Trinity, warns people against the Trinity, and then has Muhammad and other Muslims worship that entity, it would seem that they're engaged in demon worship, not in worshiping the one true God.
I got it. I understand I empathize with it. I got it. I understand it. So again, it goes back to what is the reference point? So we got a demon, you said. So this kind of actually happened, right? Saint Gabriel wasn't Saint Gabriel. Muhammad, this is a demon, right? Supposedly got private revelation, right? And then, the rest is history. And then they claim to believe in the one merciful God. And then Vatican II says they believe in the one merciful God. Here's the thing. In spite of that illusion and deception by a demon, they can still, through natural theology, so like Romans 1, if you go to Romans 1, or just like the Athenians, right? Excuse me, for what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. That's natural theology. So what they get right, what the Muslims get right, is that natural revelation, that natural theology part. But you have all this other demonic deception crap to go with it. You know what I mean? Likewise with the Jews, they reject Christ. They don't have the fullness of the truth. They don't have the plan of redemption, but the reference point is still there in spite of those differences or illusions or falsities. You know what I mean?
Out of curiosity, do you, when the document says the one true God, do you think that adjective one would include the doctrine of like divine simplicity and actus purus, that God is this pure act entity?
No. Well, if you go to Nostra Aetate, or if you go to Lumen Gentium, just read what the words they use. Adore the one God.
I'm asking if you think that it's contained in the idea of one.
I get it. So it says one God, living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, creator of heaven and earth. So basically, just with that language, and this is, natural theology 101, he's uncreated. He's, eternal. He's omnipotent. He's all merciful. He's the judge. Now, when you want to get in the intricacies of divine simplicity, I would assure you, I don't think many Muslims are neo-scholastics, but I will assure you, they will say that God is not composite or made up of parts. He's not contingent. And I mean, of course they would.
Yeah, well, actually, the reason why I bring that up is because, there are like traditions of Islam that would say that like God has a literal hand, right? And they take these as they don't think that these are merely anthropomorphisms, but they would actually they would just affirm straight up that God is composite, right? That he is this, a composition of integral parts, and that the divine essence has a, material hand.
Guys, I'm with you, dude. Their theology is all messed up. Like, it's not a true religion.
No. I understand, but do you see my concern here? I'm asking, do you think at all that compromises the integrity of the claim that, well, the commonality here is this natural theology God, which is this, unmoved mover, first cause. And I'm saying, well, in many traditions of Islam, they actually deny that claim. So how would this work out in their case?
Again, that's just bad theology. I mean, you can have the same reference point like the Athenians in God in Acts 17, right? And you could say a bunch of weird crap about God, but you still have the same reference point. I know it sounds cheap. I know it sounds like a cop-out. I know it sounds like I'm just trying to defend Nostra Aetate at any means, but I mean, when we say we worship and believe the same God as the Muslims and the Jews, we vehemently disagree on the theology and how we express what we believe to be God and how we worship God.
So in that case, I'm curious because you had mentioned earlier how Nostra Aetate doesn't include Mormons in that statement. Mm-hmm. So what would you say is the relevant difference between the Mormon God, right, and between the Muslim God that makes them sufficiently different such that one is included, in it and the other isn't?
Yeah, I just go back to Nostra Aetate, paragraph 3. The divinity as such, one, so monotheistic. That's key, because Judaism is monotheistic, right? We believe in one God. So Hindus, see ya. Mormons don't, they might claim the oneness, but as such, as divinity as such, like as a referent point, they don't. And likewise with the other attributes in hold on. So one God living and subsisting in himself, merciful and all-powerful, the creator of heaven and earth. Okay, right there, the creator of heaven and earth. I don't think, even if Mormons would claim that, they really don't. Because I believe the gods are evolved or whatever on planets or something. I don't know if that makes sense, but
but again, question, I guess I'm curious here, because you've said several times that in something like Hinduism, where they're not monotheistic, this wouldn't apply. But the document says that in Hinduism, so like right here, right, it says in Hinduism, because men contemplate the divine mystery and so on and so forth, it says that they have a flight to God with love and trust. So the document seems to be saying that Hindus within the super polytheistic or pantheistic or whatever religion that is Hinduism, they have a flight to God, capital G God, with love and trust. So like they trust God, which is like when we talk about faith as Protestants, we tend to talk about trust and leaning on God. So they have that apparently, according to the document, and they also have love, for God. And so that seems. So what would you make of that? Because I feel like that seems to go against what you've been saying as well.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when you see God in Hindu and then you see God capitalized, you might be thinking like, well, okay, there's some not equivocation, but like, okay, we're including Hindus in with the Muslims and the Jews. But this is what I'll say. It doesn't say the flight. It doesn't say the way. It says a flight. This is just natural stuff. Okay. So, I mean, yeah, they might have actual graces, but there are elements of truth and sanctification, elements, flights, dispositions, prevenient graces that the Athenians had in Acts 17. They had their flight to God, capital G, an unknown God, with what they were given through natural graces, natural theology, right? And you got to remember, like, it's talking about ascetical practices and searching philosophical inquiry. So that's just like Romans 1 and Acts 17. God gives sufficient grace to every single person on this planet. I didn't say efficacious, sufficient. Okay. So if a Hindu, unbeknownst to him, right, cooperates with that grace, and we would say it comes from the Catholic Church, but that's another debate. Then what they're doing through those ascetical practices and searching philosophical inquiry, they are on a flight, like a disposition, leading to God. This kind of goes with what Pope Francis said about how all religions are paths to God. Everyone flipped out on that. But he said paths, just like a flight or a path. All that means is through natural graces and natural religion or theology. For instance, like loving your neighbor as yourself, right? Do you not think any Hindu has never done that? Of course they have. Well, that grace comes from Christ. They just don't know it. You know what I'm saying? If they truly love their neighbor as themselves, it comes from Christ. So in that sense, right, they're probably invincibly ignorant because they don't accept Christ or probably even know about him. But that's what they're doing. And, just through the dictates of their conscience and the graces afforded to them, they're doing these certain things. And yeah, they serve as a path or a flight to God with love and trust.
Sure, but it seems like what you're in your interpretation of this sentence, the flight to God would be taking them out of Hinduism, where it's saying that the flight to God is in Hinduism.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question. Let me answer that. That's a really good question or statement or whatever. So how we would look at it is all these paths or flights or whatever you want to call them. I know it says God, okay, but just bear with me. We would say that these are elements or dispositions that lead to Jesus Christ in the gospel, okay? But we would also say, like, we can't violate your conscience. We can't manipulate and coerce you to just, hey, you have these flights to God, come into the church, receive the gospel and the sacraments. No, not at all. But these are flights or dispositions or paths to come to the fullness of the truth in the church and the gospel of Jesus Christ. I know St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she didn't proselytize. She would say, hey, if you're a Hindu, just be a good Hindu. But she didn't mean that in the sense like, oh, you're an heir, keeping your heir. Just stay true to yourself and your conscience. And if that leads you to Christianity, then so be it.
But I guess, go ahead, Kim.
No, I was just gonna, add on that I think that, the point of divergence here is that I can agree that, it is true that all humans, right, uh, you know, on the basis of natural reason alone are able to affirm truths about God, right?
Yes.
And from that, you can say that at a certain point, every human is born with some data that it makes it such that they can reference God.
Yes.
The point that our contention is that isn't the end of it, though.
Nope,
Is that is that this is what's called a causal definition, right? And once a proper definition is entered into the picture, if you reject that proper definition, then while you can say that from the vantage point of the causal definition, they are getting at the same entity. The point that we're making is that Islam is specifically a claim about special revelation, right?
Mhm.
And it is a claim about special revelation that is intended to latch on to something. And yes, I'm aware that they say that the God of general revelation is the God of special revelation for them. Our contention is that at the end of the analysis, right, the God that they end up concocting is utterly contradictory to the real definition of God. So I understand what it's trying to say. I actually, my argument is not so much against the document. It's more, against someone who would be saying, without a doubt, that every single God concept, right, simply because it latches on to general revelation, right, is on equal footing, in reference. And I just don't think that that's true. Maybe it's the case that you can say that people who haven't explicitly neglected parts of God's real definition are still latching on to the same entity. But I think that once that, occurs, they are talking about two different entities. And I would say the Acts 17 example, what's important here is that it is an unknown God. And so to the degree that there are any affirmations that are made about it, they're probably probable affirmations, right? Because this God is unknown. There's nothing that is known about the God. And so with that said, that's not enough to rise to the level of explicit negation. And then that's what I'm claiming, is that if there is explicit negation, then that gives us good grounds for thinking we are talking about two different entities.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick, Javier, I don't want to, you're probably like, when is this going to end? So when I said invincibly ignorant, we got to understand there is such a thing as culpable or vincible ignorance. Okay. We aren't just saying like, oh, all Muslims, all Jews, they're all invincibly ignorant and they're all going to go to heaven. All the good Jews and Muslims, they're in heaven. No, not at all. If anything, that's the very minority. I would say most people probably, if they reject Christianity knowingly with full consent, deliberately, like, yeah, that doesn't work. That's not invincible ignorance. So when you reject Christianity, when you reject Christ and his church knowingly and with full consent, I'm sorry, that's no bueno. That's no bueno.
Well, so I guess this is why I was asking that question earlier about the hypothetical example where someone's like a good Hindu and a demon appears as Krishna and does all this. That the reason I was asking that is because it seems from your argument, at least what your argument seems to entail is it seems to entail that in that hypothetical, if a demon impersonating Krishna or whatever shows up to a Hindu and says, "Hello, I am Krishna," they begin to list out all the classical theism, like divine attributes, and they ascribe those to the demon, ascribes those to themselves, and says, "Go ahead, worship me." Your argument seems to entail that if the person then worships the demon, that their worship would actually latch onto the actual God who is divinely simple and has these attributes, as opposed to the demon, is what it seems to be entailed by your argument, which is kind of worrisome to me.
Okay, so
it would seem to make idolatry impossible, is the issue.
Yeah. So there's deception, and then there's authentic supernatural public revelation, right? We would agree, all of us in Christianity, we have the fullness of divine revelation, supernatural revelation. We accept it, we promulgate it, we defend it, right? Now, if you have someone that's being visited by a demon and then is being deceived into worshiping that demon, believing that's, did you say Krishna?
Yeah, and let's say that they believe that they take the demon at face value and the demon ascribes to themselves all of like their pure actuality, eternality, so on and so forth. The demon says that they possess all those divine attributes, and the person worships them on account of that.
I would say that's just false revelation. You know what I mean? So like on the revelation part, like when it comes to supernatural revelation, that's where we have faith and all that. That's not going to help that person. But in spite of that demon, in spite of that deception, this person still could have the same referent point. You know what I mean? So I get what you're saying about like the demon with Muhammad, excuse me. And man, you could just,
because hopefully you can see my concern, right? Because so for me, and then we'll get to a super chat question here in a second. For me, I would say that this is part of the problem, actually. It's like we have actually two different apologetics issues overlapping, which is one of the arguments that I've always heard about, for example, when Roman Catholics defend their Mariology and they say we're not worshiping Mary, is because not everybody, but a lot of you guys will say, well, we don't ascribe divine attributes to Mary, right? So how could we be giving her latria? We don't think that she's God. We don't ascribe these attributes to her. What I'm pointing out is it seems, at least as the entailment of the way that you guys will defend Nostra Aetate and such, it seems to entail almost like if someone did ascribe all those attributes to Mary and then proceeded to worship her, that it still wouldn't be idolatry because the worship would somehow be redirected and map onto God who actually possesses these attributes. So to me, it almost seems to be like, it almost seems to, so the reductio I'm trying to provide here is it almost seems that if we follow your train of thought, it would make idolatry impossible. Right? Because if you ever ascribe divine attributes to anything and then you worship it, it sounds like you guys would just say, well, they're actually intending to worship the one true God by ascribing these attributes. And so the worship will just map onto the one true God. It doesn't map onto the actual entity that they're talking to.
I kind of think I know where you're coming from. But can we agree that the referent point, forget about Jews and Muslims just for a second, but I mean, take you and I, if we're looking up at the sky, you see a star, I see a planet, we see the same object, right? Yeah, regardless of how we express it or what we believe it to be. So that object, regardless of how we express and how we're deceived and how we attribute this and that reference, that object will be what it is, no matter what. Do you agree?
Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So, I mean, what does it matter if, I don't know, a demon visits me or, someone attributes to Mary divine attributes and starts sacrificing bulls and goats to her? That's not the reference point. That's all wrong. The reference point is over here. And if we're at the same object that we're looking at or worshiping and believing, we could get the expression and the sense wrong, but you can't just like, oh, let's go to a different object or a different referent point and then just claim that that's the referent point. You know what I mean? I think that's what you're maybe trying to do. It's
but that's my worry though, right? Because I think if someone to follow your example, I think if someone says, oh, I'm going to worship Mary, and then they assign to her all the divine attributes and they start sacrificing goats to her, I think that person is clearly engaged in idolatry with Mary as their reference point. I mean, they're intending to give this worship to Mary. They're just incorrect about Mary actually being pure act and whatever in this example, right? But I mean, what you just said to me is really worrisome because then it almost makes it sound like idolatry here is almost impossible. Like if I were to grab a piece of wood and ascribe to that piece of wood all of these divine attributes and worship it, well, I technically worship the one true God because divine attributes don't actually belong to the piece of wood. It almost would it would seem to lead to the conclusion that idolatry is almost like impossible. Like you can't actually do it because it would always just map onto God. Yeah, I see what you're saying. But again, just to go back to what we were saying, the referent point is the referent point. The object is the object, no matter what happens. So we got that. So the whole Mary analogy, or choose Krishna or whatever you have, that's the idolatry. Well, but what you're saying is, well, then how do we know what's idolatry? What's the referent point or the object? Well, how do we determine or distinguish between those two? Welcome. Can I ask a clarifier? Because welcome to the Catholic. I want
to make sure I'm tracking. When you bring up you see a star, I see a planet, but it's the same thing, and we're both witnessing it. Maybe I'm not following, but I'm not sure that's exactly what's happening with what Javier is describing. It sounds more to me like you're both saying, I saw a planet, but one of you saw a planet and one of you saw a helicopter. That you're both claiming to have seen the same thing, but you objectively haven't. In Javier's, well, I'm just trying to make sure I'm tracking. In Javier's example, there is a demon presenting in all the ways that would fool someone into thinking that they were God. So the person directs their worship at this entity claiming these things for itself. Is it your position then that so long as the intention is to worship the thing with these categories, that the only thing that actually does have these categories is actually what ends up being worshipped ultimately?
So I think I understand what you're saying now. At first I didn't, but yeah, you got to remember, like what I was saying with the referent point and the object in the sky or whatever. If we're looking at the same object, the object is the object.
But you're not looking at the same object. That's my point.
Well, then the argument falls, because then it's all idolatry. Like what's the argument if
that's our concern? Is that
this also kind of relates to the point that Cameron brought up earlier, and it's like your analogy is almost begging the question. Like the way you're framing the question already assumes that the object is the same.
Right. That's the problem, right? Is that we do agree that there is a common, historical core to the belief and general revelation, right? But our claim is that when this claim is understood from the vantage point of special revelation, right? If there are these fundamentally different claims, at the end of the day, we can just say, well, no, this isn't like the Superman Clark Kent, analogy, right? God is necessarily triune. This is something that Christians know. All that the causal definition, leads us to believe is that there is something that can in principle latch on to this triune God. But if that triune God is neglected, or if the causal belief that leads you to believe in a non-triune God is produced by some demonic entity that can't in principle be the triune God, then it just follows that we aren't dealing with an example of you pointing up in the sky and having two different references to the same object, or referencing the object with two different senses. That's our concern is that we just aren't granting that, right? I understand that in theory it's true that sometimes that occurs, but that just shouldn't be our operative assumption.
If I could just add one more thing. So because my concern with your analogy is that, again, it is almost begging the question from your perspective, because in your analogy the object is the same, right? The star in the sky. But from our perspective, the way we see it would be something more like, imagine that I looked up and I saw a bright light in the sky and I said, that's a star. And then someone else pointed at a lamp and said, no, that's the star. And they both have these similarities, they're bright, they shine, they emit light, it looks white to me. Well, they're the same object, therefore, because they have these commonalities. So that would be a better example of how we're interpreting the situation here.
Yeah, and can I add just really quick? I think that the claim would be a lot easier if it just would say that from the vantage point of natural theology, we are in a situation, right, where we can refer to the same God. I think where it becomes difficult is that, this is specifically about religious claims, right? And that's where I think, we are skeptical.
So here's the thing, right? You got a star, it's burning bright. You got a lamp, it's burning bright. Okay. Well, how do you determine which one is the object or the referent, right? The true one? Is that what you were saying, Sam and Cameron?
Yeah, well, all I'm saying is that from our vantage point, the star and the lamp would probably be a better analogy to explain what we think is going on with, Muslims saying that they claim to worship the one true God.
Well, public supernatural revelation, right? We have motives of credibility, and but the church. See, that's where we might differ on this. The church protects and safeguards true revelation. Okay, and part of that's in Scripture. So, how many heretics have we had? How many schismatics have we had? How many different people saying no, this, or just different religions, Judaism, Islam. So, who's the arbiter to determine if this is the proper object or if that's the proper referent? You know what I mean? Because that's exactly the problem that you get into when you don't have a magisterium, an arbiter, someone to safeguard that. That's what I would say to that.
Well, I would say,
but still,
but
hold on. There's a distinction between the supernatural element and the natural element when it comes to revelation and knowing God, because you can know God naturally through through creation and natural reason without supernatural revelation. So if you're like, oh, he's got a lamp over here, but he's got a star over here. Well, they both could, in theory, even though like the objects are different, in theory, just through natural reason, or I'm sorry, the objects are the same. Through natural reason, they could come to that conclusion.
So real quick, because he hasn't gotten the chance to speak yet, Practical Christian Lessons joined the stream. What's up, Josh? Josh, do you want to, is there anything you want to say? Or if not, we can go on to Cam.
No, I don't think I have anything really to add to the current conversation. I think you guys have covered a lot of the same things. The only thing I'm thinking about is like, Exodus 32, where they're worshiping the calf at the mountain and they literally say, "This is Yahweh," and then are still condemned for worshiping the calf. That's the only thing in my mind.
But the object's different. The reference is different. We have a created calf. We don't have an omnipotent God. So I could say right now, your beard led us out of Egypt. That's not the same reference.
Probably did.
Yeah.
It did.
I would say that the issue is for them, they are saying it is the Yahweh that took us out. They are referencing the same being. They're condemned there for making the statue and then saying that this is the representative of that same being. But they're still referring to Yahweh. There's no question about that from the actual text.
No, another interesting example would be the bronze serpent. The bronze serpent would be another interesting example, because even the bronze serpent was actually a type of Christ. And yet when they worshipped the bronze serpent, God immediately nuked it, right? I was like, we gotta get rid of this.
Javier, can I just say something? So the golden calf was a what? It was an idol, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what made it an idol? Just building it? What did they do? What did they say?
They worshipped it.
Right. Because the object was not God. But just because they say and express and sense that this calf is Yahweh and it leads us out of Egypt doesn't make it so, because the object.
Well, that's our position.
Yeah, that's exactly
our
point, though. That's exactly our point, though. So just because you claim to be worshiping God doesn't mean that the object of your worship is what you claim. That's exactly our point. We would say something similar is going on with the Muslims, where
not if the referent and the object are the same.
Right, but that's begging the question. That's exactly what we're disputing, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can dispute it, but I mean, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
real quick, Cam, before you say something, real quick, if you're cool with Eric, just because I'm seeing Since 33 would like to take up your mantle.
He's the I will leave. Bring him up.
Man, I'm gonna look
if you're cool with it. So last thoughts, Cam, and then I'll give Eric the final word, and then we'll let Since 33 on here. But I appreciate you for coming on, Eric.
Yeah, I'm gonna look like an absolute coward here because I have to go. This coffee shop closes at 6:30.
Cam, I gotta leave too. It's not just you. We can both walk away together.
Yeah, thank you, pal. Thank you. Yeah, no, I actually understand your overall take here. I mean, where I think that this gets sketchy is just that, the document is claiming this, about traditions that purport to have special revelation, right? If it were just saying that, general revelation puts us, in a way that there's objective incentives that we could pursue the true religion. I mean, I think that's probably true. I would say, yes, it is true. I think where this gets difficult is, yes, like as Samuel was noting, as others were noting, from the vantage point of special revelation, they are led to from our perspective, and I understand you disagree with this, latch on to a different entity, a demonic entity, and we would say B, we actually do just think that, from our own special revelation claims, we are able to make positive affirmations about what God is or who God is, right? And I understand you think that we can't, but as Protestants, we just do think the scriptures are clear and they do give us sufficient basis to say those sorts of things.
Let me just say this. I'm sorry. Is it possible to believe and worship in the true God, the one merciful God, the same object, the same referent, right? And then have a demon persuade and deceive you to believe in heretical things about that God?
Yes.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you're dealing with again, the possibility claim here. It still begs the question, because that is actually an example, right, in which per your analogy, it is the same God, right, who is just having false things said about it.
Right.
Our claim is that the issues we're dealing with are much more fundamental, such that we are actually led to say that at the end of the day, these are different entities, right? And so, yes, it is possible that, I would say that this is the point of the, analogy with the vodka and the water. Yes, it is possible that you can reference, right, which the vodka analogy really speaks to me, as people who know me know.
I'll take a shot.
Yeah, exactly. But like that's our overall take, right? It's just that it doesn't really hold that just because you can possibly be wrong about something, right, that you are actually wrong. And since we do believe that we actually have direct knowledge of God via special revelation, our claim is that since the Muslims deny pretty fundamental things about who that God is, even if they start out from the same, at the same place from natural theology, at the end of the day, they just are talking about a different entity.
Okay, but let me ask you this.
Yeah.
If you change your expression or the way you sense something, an object or reference, does that change the entity, or does the entity remain?
Not necessarily, right? Like I grant this, but the point is that we don't assume that we're talking about the same entity when we're discussing pretty fundamental differences, right? And then that's the point, is that I just assume that when we're making pretty fundamentally different claims about God, that we aren't referring to the same entity. Of course, it's true that yes, you can refer to the same thing via different senses. I mean, that was granted from the beginning. It just doesn't lead to the conclusion that, at the end of the day, just because of that possibility, it actually is true that we're referring to the same thing.
Right. Also, I'm not sure.
Yeah, real quick, guys, because I want to give Since 33 the opportunity to come up. But Eric, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like to say? If you want to plug your own channel, people want to check out also our Canon Debate, they can just look up my channel name and look up Canon Debate. You'll see us got to have a chat on that. Anything else you want to plug?
I hope you made a lot of money off that. I loved how I did give you permission. You clipped it and then put it on your own. And then all your subscribers just bashed on me. This dude was Googling this and Googling that during
No one bashed Eric. It's actually the fact even that you came up, even on this stream, the fact that you were willing to come up with everyone can see on the screen, you're surrounded literally by everybody. So I appreciate the courage and the willingness to come up and talk these things out.
Well, last word. I will say I do appreciate all 5 of you guys. You were very charitable, very ecumenical, very cordial, well-intentioned. I will say this. I am empathetic and sympathetic to at least your position, because 99% of lay Catholics either don't understand Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium, or they just flat out reject it. So I'm empathetic. I get it. We're all brothers. I love you guys. Can't wait to see you in heaven, hopefully, one day.
Yep.
Same
love you too.
Thank you
so
much.
Appreciate the interaction.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
all right, see ya.
I'll pray that I'm invincibly ignorant.
Yeah.
All right. Since 33, I DM'd you the link if you would like to hop on and discuss for a little bit. I don't know how much longer we're going to be on. Because we've been on for 2 hours, but
in the meantime, I wanted to say, and you guys can tell me what you think about this. I'm not sure if I'm going nowhere with this, but I was thinking about it, and in some of the analogies that we've been using, where let's say, for instance, you look up into the sky and you see a bright light, and 2 people are pointing at that same bright light but disagree on what it is. I'm not sure if that is even a comparable analogy, because at least in that situation, you can actually see something visually. Yes. And you guys are both pointing to that.
Yeah.
Even if you disagree on the characteristics of that thing, you guys are both pointing to a visible thing. Whereas, as Cameron pointed out earlier, we're not exactly in the same situation when it comes to God, because we're talking about a causal definition, right? It's not as if we are seeing visually an object in front of us and then both pointing to that. Again, I'm not sure if that's a relevant point to bring up. Perhaps I'm overlooking it. But part of me feels like that is actually significant.
Yeah. So here's the analogy, right? So we observe motion in the world, right? we kind of posit as a stand-in to explain that, right, that there is an entity that is pure act. And so that is the causal definition of God, right? And from that vantage point, both us and Muslims are affirming the same thing. Where this diverges, right, is that when we're dealing with, how that God has revealed himself, or pretty fundamental things about that God, which, from the Christian perspective, rises to the level of a real definition, right? Once that negation becomes strong enough, it doesn't matter if we started out with, the same causal definition, right? It just is the case that from the vantage point of special revelation and from the vantage point of God as he is, we are just referring to different entities. And it's important because causal definitions are not real definitions, right? They are ways of essentially, they're placeholders, right? When we're seeking to prove things about God.
Right.
And so,
And that's what, I think that's why like Javier's investigation crime analogy was better, because in that situation, you are actually reasoning a posteriori from effects to a cause, right? You have this situation, you have a murder, right? And then you have two running hypotheses, right? Is the murderer, person X or person Y? And for no reason at all, let's say that one of these people is named Jesus, right? It's like you have two detectives and saying, they're saying like, well, we both agree that the murderer, had to be strong enough to, physically subdue this woman. And we both agree that the murderer has to be, white, because the witnesses said that, that's what they saw. So it's like, okay, well, we have these commonalities in our definition. But if ultimately those two investigators are like you said, Javier, like pointing at different people at the end of the day and saying like, this is the murderer, this is not. The question is, do those commonalities, suffice to say that like, oh, we're actually speaking about the same person? So I don't know if that made sense. That was a little bit verbose.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have Kevin from Since 33. How are you doing, Kevin? I know Adam needs to head out.
I know.
Adam,
I feel
can
so
head out.
bad.
I do too.
Just got here.
Right,
I've been awake for like 26 hours. I'm brain dead. I have to go. I love you all very much. Kevin, it's nice to meet you. Goodbye.
Hey, guys.
Congrats on 5,000. God's peace, guys.
Yeah. Hey, to avoid seeming like a coward, I did say I had to go.
No, you're running. You're running.
Oh, no.
His presence is too
Since
powerful.
33 shows up and half the Lutheran panel leaves. Coincidence?
Actually, I'm doing you a throwing you with facts and logic. I kid. Hey, best wishes. Hope you, destroy them all,
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. All right, see you, Cam. Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm
What's
on my
going on,
phone.
Kevin? How are
I'm
you
on my
doing?
phone, so I'm not sure, and I just bought a new house. We're moving in. I just took a little break, and I don't have Wi-Fi, so I'm on my phone's data. So I don't know how that's.
There you go. You probably still have a better setup than I did for the first year and a half of my my Wi-Fi situation with the channel. So hey.
We can hear you good.
That's good. Thanks for congrats on 5K, dude. I'm almost.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm on 4.4. So maybe I'll do a celebration. I'll have you on too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I want to say real quick before we start, guys, if you don't know Since 33, he's a Roman Catholic apologist. You can go to his channel, Since 33. The one thing that I really appreciate about Since 33 is that unlike a lot of the other sort of pop apologists from their side, he actually does reference traditional Protestant authors. You'll see Johann Gerhard. He might be the only Roman Catholic I've seen put Johann Gerhard on a on a thumbnail, right? So despite our disagreements, I appreciate that you at least try to engage with our sources. So
thanks, appreciate that. Oh, and
yeah,
Sam, finally nice to talk to you. Practical Christian lessons. I don't think we've ever dialogued on YouTube or Twitter, but it's nice to meet you too. But Samuel and I have gone back and forth.
Yes, sir.
And
I was going to say here we are in the flesh, but not exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, everybody, I should have mentioned this. Samuel and Cameron over from the Scholastic Lutherans YouTube channel. If you guys want to follow them as well, it's over at Scholastic Lutherans. But yeah, Kevin, so question for you. Did you get to catch, I don't know when you hopped on the stream, did you get to catch any of the analogies that we brought up? Thank you, Cameron. Look at that. He joined us and left a super chat. That's great. If you guys want to follow his lead, everybody in the comments, if you want us to, this is our first legit live stream like this. If you guys want more of this sort of content, please be sure to let us know. Leave us a like, leave us comments telling us how much you appreciated it. And if you can, leave us a super chat. So make sure to follow Cameron's lead there. Thank you, Cameron. Love you too. And same thing from Adam. But yeah, so Kevin, did you get to hear any of our analogies that we provided earlier to try to kind of explain where we're coming from?
No, can you please repeat the last 2 hours?
Yeah.
No, I kind of heard. So fill me in. So I heard something about how the Muslim revelation comes from like a demonic figure, and that might be who the Muslims are referring to, and therefore, they're not worshiping the same God as Christ. There's probably a lot more than that. But that's all I heard.
Right, Javier, I think,
Go ahead.
I think if you're going to share one analogy, Javier, it would be good to do the crime investigation one, because I think that's a good analogy because it actually leaves indeterminate from the get-go whether or not the object is the same.
Yeah, so let me repeat that analogy because I it's so funny. I butchered this yesterday on Cleave to Antiquities live stream, but I got it. So I was like, I gotta make this simpler, and so that's what I did. So I wrote it down. So I'll just repeat it. Thank you for the super sticker there. All right, so the analogy is something like this, right? So imagine that we have a murder scene. 2 detectives arrive. After initial analysis, they agree on some general facts, right? They agree that a murder occurred, that it happened at night, the killer used a blunt object, and let's say they agree that the killer had to be strong enough to overpower, the victim. So far, they share some truths about the nature of the killer, but then their paths from this point on completely diverge. So we have the Detective A. Detective A becomes convinced that the killer is Susie, and he actively pursues Susie, talks to people in her life, interviews them, interrogates her, built a case around Susie. Detective B becomes convinced that it was Jack, and so he pursues Jack, builds a case around Jack. There's all the same stuff, but for Jack. Now, Detective A doesn't just lack knowledge about Jack. He knows that about Jack. He explicitly denies that Jack could be the killer. His entire investigation is actually oriented away from Jack being the killer. But at the end of the investigation, it turns out that Jack was the killer. My question would be, could we say that both detectives were investigating and pursuing the same person simply because they got some facts about the killer originally right? I would say no, because they clearly built cases around entirely different people. Detective A didn't just lack knowledge about Jack. They said, no, Jack was not the guy. I'm rejecting that. My whole case is built around the fact that it wasn't Jack. What would you say to that?
That's a really good one. Yeah. And I see the analogy to our situation with Muslims. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I don't have to name it because it would just be, it's a really good analogy. I think though, I would say that when you said that they share a lot of common things, like, being able to overpower the victim, the weapon that they use, and all the other things you said, I would say though that's not at the center of what is, I guess, keeping them together. What's keeping them together is probably the killer in this case. And so when they say the killer, that is, who was the right killer? Susie? Susie was the right killer?
Yeah, or let's say Jack was the killer. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, the killer is Jack. Now, when the Detective A says Susie, he's referring to Susie, but when he says the killer, he's referring to Jack, really. And so he's just wrong on who the identity of the killer is. But when they both say killer, they're not referring to one to Susie and one to
Okay, so that's
right.
That's true.
Case. So the killer of this case. That's an objective truth.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're both. They're in this. So I get what you're saying. So yeah, they're both intending to pursue the killer.
Yes.
But the reason why we would say this analogy is relevant is because one of them is not actually pursuing the killer. They're intending to, right? That's their goal. But ultimately, they're failing at their goal because they got the wrong guy. And we would say likewise. I mean, we agree that Muslims intend to worship the right God. I mean, pretty self-evident. But we would say that they're failing to do so. Whereas I think that, as far as I understand it, the Vatican II claim is not only that they're intending to worship God, but that they actually are worshiping the same God, albeit not efficaciously, not unto salvation. They're getting things wrong. But you can correct me if you think I'm off the rails there.
I just want to add there, and you can clarify if I'm wrong on this. It's not just worship in the sense of generic worship. It's latria. It's the same type of worship of adoring God that I know is, at least in the past, been levied at us as not giving to God because we don't offer the right type of worship towards God. This has been an argument I know Joe Heschmeyer and many others made in the past few years.
I don't want to cut anybody off. Is you want to say anything
go
else?
ahead.
Yeah, I'll just
No, go
address.
ahead.
And by the way, what is Practical Christian's name? I don't want to say Practical
Josh.
Christian. Josh. Yeah, I would just say. I mean, yeah, I really don't like. I don't like popular talking points without at least some clarification. I think a lot of the popular talking points on both sides are bad arguments, but they're probably a few distinctions away from being better arguments. So I mean, I've said many times, and other Catholics I know, we've said many times, when we say not worshiping God in Protestantism, we're just saying, externally, like the one external act that is latria is sacrifice, because it's the only thing that is, you can't redeem that. I can't offer sacrifice, like, immolate an animal to my mother and then cope about it and say, no, it's actually okay. Like, that's the one act. And I don't think that's even a point of disagreement between us, but I'm not saying that but there's also internal sacrifice, an internal disposition, and Romans 12:1, right? Like, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your spiritual worship. So it's an internal disposition. There's no question there that that Protestants have that, even at a supernatural level via their baptism. So I guess unfortunately, it's just Catholics don't say the other side of the story. But I think, though, from a Protestant point of view, is I don't think there's an immediate problem with Protestants. I would put a biblical argument against this, but I don't think there's a problem with Protestants saying, yeah, that's fine. We don't have an external act of worship in our religion, and that's fine. Jesus didn't intend us to have one. I don't really think there's that point of a disagreement there. So just to answer that, but I would say you guys worship God, by your internal disposition, which is actually more important than external sacrifice, because you're not going to have the sacrifice of the Mass in heaven. You're going to be offering yourself entirely God for all eternity, So I mean, in a sense, that's more important. But that aside, I forgot what you said in reply to my objection about the killer and Susie, but I don't know if that answers your objection there.
Yeah, just to refresh, kind of like my response to your point about the killer, is that, because I understand what you're saying. If I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is that while both detectives may have different guys, they're actually pursuing the idea of the killer, right? They're intending to pursue the killer. And what I said in response to that is that, well, they may be intending to do so, but ultimately one of them is wrong, right? One is pursuing Susie and one is pursuing Jack, and they've mutually, rejected the other option. So even though they're both intending to pursue the person who is the killer, nevertheless, we would claim that, one detective is not actually pursuing the right guy. And we would say likewise, even though both, Muslims and Christians are intending to worship God, one of us has the wrong guy, because one of us says that God is triune, the other one says that God is not triune. And therefore, even though we're both intending to pursue this concept, which we call deity or divinity or God, nevertheless, one of us wrong. And obviously, since we're Christians here, we would say that it is the Muslims in that case.
Yeah, I guess. Do you have? So I guess what would be your argument? Because I don't think you would. There's people have different views on this, so I don't want to assume what your view is. But people have. I don't think you'd have a problem conceding that someone who has never received divine revelation and just he's a man in the woods in 3,000 years ago can know about the true God and even offer acts of natural religion to that one true God, because he's not rejecting the Trinity. He's just ignorant of it. Would you agree with that? Or would you say that we should not refer to the one true God?
So I actually talked about this earlier, and I'm sympathetic to that position, right? But what my argument from earlier in the stream was that, had to burp. My argument is that I'm not entirely convinced that would be analogous to what's going on with the Muslim in the 21st century. Because, for instance, we can use Aristotle as an example. Let's say you have somebody like Aristotle who reasons to the idea that there must be an unmoved mover, or must be this creator of the universe, and he gets many things right about divine attributes, so on and so forth, right? That would be an instance of somebody having a conception of divinity that abstracts from the plurality of persons, right? Obviously, Aristotle doesn't know the plurality of persons. Whereas in the case of a Muslim, not only are they abstracting from or prescinding from the notion of the plurality of persons, but they're saying, yeah, I reject that. The Trinity is not my object of worship. And that's why I brought up the point earlier that we don't only have to look at what the Roman Catholics are saying about the Muslims, but we also have to consider what the Muslims are saying about themselves. And when you read their religious texts, they're saying the Trinity, that's not what I worship. I denied that. And for that reason, I think that there is a significant difference between, you know, abstracting from a consideration of the Trinity, right? Versus saying, I denied the Trinity. I don't think that those are equal in the circumstance.
Especially when you add not just that the Muslim
Hello?
has hey, yeah, so can you hear us?
I
Oh,
can't hear
no.
anybody. I got a call. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
The debate's
Can
over.
you guys hear me?
Oh no,
Yeah.
we can hear you. Yeah,
Can
we
you
can
hear
hear you.
Yeah, I can't
if
hear
you
you
wanna-
guys. I got a call on my
uh,
phone and now I can't hear you
yeah,
guys.
here.
Hold on. Settings, audio. Okay. Hey Javier, I'm gonna rejoin. Sorry for the trouble. I got a call and I gotta now my
That's all
phone's
good.
not playing the audio.
All right, he'll join back up. In the meantime, thank you so much for covering the Reformation. Congratulations on 5K, Javier. Here's so many more. I hope you're feeling better.
Yes.
Samuel.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm glad that I feel encouraged that somebody remembered. Yeah, you know, despite the fact that I'm 22, I had to deal with kidney stones. Like, man, that was not fun. But yes, I had surgery. The stones were removed. I had
Praise the
a
Lord.
stent placed inside of me. For those who know what that is, I'll spare you all the details for this to be a modest stream. But nevertheless, yeah, that wasn't pleasant. But no, I'm doing better. I have the stent taken out. The stones are removed. I don't need to take pain medication anymore. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Oh,
I heard
can you hear
everything
us?
you said. I heard everything you said. It's just the second you stopped talking, I think that's when I got the call.
Okay,
cool.
I'm on my phone, so.
Yeah, well,
But-
if I can add real quick to what Samuel
Yeah.
said before you answer as well.
Yeah.
So I think the issue here isn't just that when someone's trying to utilize this this proper name, right? Whether the proper name is God or whether it's Allah in Arabic or whether it's God of Abraham, so on and so forth. Not only do they have several, when it comes to the sense, not only do they have several clusters of identifying information that are completely contradictory to the truth and to the actual reference clusters of information, things like being triune, so on and so forth. The problem is there's also a counterfeit sort of causal source of this cluster of descriptions, right? So the causal source would be the instance, whether it's in the cave where Muhammad is seeing the supposed angel Gabriel, or whether it's on the night journey where Muhammad is interacting supposedly with Allah without intermediary or what have you. And so the problem here is twofold, right? Is we have all these clusters of descriptions that are wrong and exactly the opposite of the truth. And then there's also an errant causal source of these erroneous clusters of information that's a different entity, right? The different entity ascribing to itself godhood and so on and so forth. And so that's like the dual problem that we would have here.
Yeah, I mean, few thoughts on that. I do believe that Muhammad had visions from a demon, but I mean, like, we don't know that it was an actual entity. It could have, like, theoretically, it could have been on drugs, and therefore there's no entity that really gave him any sort of false revelation. You know what I'm saying? And therefore, they're not when the Muslims say, "Oh, we worship the entity who gave Muhammad these visions." There's actually no entity at all. There could be, right? I do believe there was probably a demon involved, but I'm just saying we don't know that for certain, that there wasn't any entity at all. Sorry. So I had a few thoughts, and someone came into the room, so I lost my train of thought. But basically, I don't think you would say, correct me where I'm misunderstanding you. I don't think you would say that our mistakes about what the true God has done in history and his revelations made would change our object of reference.
So I think it depends here. So I think this is like a sort of like cumulative case sort of situation when it comes to the Muslims, right? So it's not just the fact that they have wrong information. It's
Right.
not just the fact that they're also actively denying the Trinity and denying the correct information, which they're also doing. But on top of that would be the fact that whether it is a literal demon, which I would hold that it was, or whether, let's say, it was, as schizophrenia sort of vision or whatever, there's still this causal source that's claiming to be, right, that's assigning to themselves the proper name of Allah or God of Abraham or what have you. And this is a different causal source from which stems the Muslim religion than the actual causal source that Christians have, which is the actual God of Abraham, right? This guy's like a scammer. If you remember my scammer analogy that I gave earlier as well, where like if a scammer impersonates a celebrity, asks you for money, and you really think it's a celebrity, and you send them money, who did you send money to? Ultimately, you sent money to the scammer, right? In this instance, it's all these things put together. It's you have facts that are wrong, you have a contradiction of the true facts, and you also have an entity, whether it's actually a demonic entity or whether it is a figment of Muhammad's imagination. You still have another source, a causal source of these errant clusters of descriptions that all together is then creating a different referent. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think that's good that you're saying that it's. You said like what word did you use? Holistic or
cumulative? Yeah,
cumulative. So I guess my question would be, do you think modern Jews who reject the Trinity and worship the same God as us Christians?
Yeah, that's well, I'll let Samuel go because he unmuted, and then I'll go.
But no.
You don't think they do? Okay. I'm curious. So I guess I could put forward several arguments, but I think if we wanted to talk biblically, because we both agree on biblical principles, I would say, is in Romans 1:20, right? Everyone knows the verse I'm going to. What I would argue from there is not simply that, what St. Paul says can be known by God, what's made clear to people, right, was sufficient for them to honor him as God, right? Because that's why they're being held guilty for not doing. Although they could have honored, and I'm not saying verbatim because I don't have it in front of me, but you can, if you want to pull it up, you're more than welcome to. Please just not NIV. But
sure. Wait, so what chapter would it be? Real quick, just
Romans 1:18 through 24-ish.
Romans.
I'll
pull it up.
Yeah.
And we have a couple super chats we want to get to in a second, but yeah, go ahead, continue.
I guess a biblical argument I would put is, according to St. Paul, there what we would call the divine attributes, right, which we can't see yet in this life, right, but we can know them by what we can see around us in the world, is sufficient to refer to the true God. And then I would argue, how is denying divine procession, so like the Trinity, whether it be one procession or two processions in God, aspiration, or even misattributing some sort of action that was really by a demon to God. How does that destroy what is sufficient to refer to the true God? And I haven't really heard a clear-cut argument for that. And then I would jump to Romans, I think it's Romans 10:3, when St. Paul says, the Jews who have obviously heard the apostolic preaching have zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. So their zeal is still pointed towards God, right? But certainly not according to knowledge. So I would use that, and then I would use something else in 1 Corinthians 10, but I don't want to say too much. That's too much to respond to at once. So I guess so in this Romans 1 passage, I guess, how does denying the Trinity break what is sufficient to refer to God?
Well, just briefly on the Romans 12 verse, like they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
Romans 10.
Romans 10, excuse me. I think that would be analogous to the investigation analogy we used earlier, where we could say like the investigators, have a zeal for the murderer, right? They're attempting to catch the murderer, but not according to knowledge, because they have the wrong one. Something to that effect. But Javier, if you have any thoughts about the Romans 1 passage.
I would say basically the same thing, and that is, I think they have a zeal for God. So the interesting thing is, for Talmudic Jews, for Jews after the time of Jesus who deny the Trinity, I would agree with Samuel. I would lean toward them not having the same reference and not worshiping the same God. Although I understand that, I actually think it's a less clear-cut case than with the Muslims, because the Muslims have a demonic entity that's adding extra information that serves as a cause, as a causal source for these errant clusters of description. Okay, and they're ascribing to themselves being the God of Abraham and all this sort of stuff. So I think it's actually much more clear cut with the Muslims. But even with the Jews, I would say that the same thing Samuel said, which is I think they can have a zeal for God, and they're attempting to do this, but just like with the murder analogy, both detectives have a zeal for catching the killer, but only one of them is actually pursuing the killer, right?
Right.
Or the analogy with the scammer, right? Like they have a zeal for giving their celebrity money to help them with a project, but they actually gave money to a scammer. And so we would say that like these people are being scammed into giving worship to an entity that's not God.
Yeah. So to summarize, I think
though.
Javier's point there, I just think that we have to distinguish between intention and fact. Right. So I could concede, right, like I mentioned earlier, that in intention, both Jews and Muslims, are worshiping God. Right. That is what they are intending to do. But what we would, contend is that it is not so clear, in fact, like what is actually going on. Because I would assume that, obviously, I would assume that you agree that there can be circumstances in which somebody intends to worship God, but they are actually committing idolatry. And I think so far as you can see that that's a possibility, then I think it makes the conversation a little bit more complicated. And also, just for the record, I would agree with Javier that I think the question is much more clear cut with the case of the.
Before we continue, I just want to read a couple of super chats really quickly. So somebody asks, Risto asks, do LDS worship the same God? Why or why not? Again, you don't have to deviate the whole conversation, but if you want to give a quick response to that, since 33.
Yeah, we would say no, because they don't because they worship. I mean, they believe in creatures. Like their version of God is a creature. Like St. Paul's entire point is in Romans 1 is that they worship the pagans who who could have worshiped and honor God. They worship the creature, not the creator. And so their weird doctrine of like you become a god after you die or whatever. That means you were created at some point. So
okay, another question, similar question from Robert Holmes says, does Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawah worship the same God as Catholics? Those are the real Muslim who believe in all Muslims' dogma. I guess that's the very question we're discussing, right? Is whether the Muslim apologists worship the same God as Christians. But
yeah, I don't know who these guys are. I mean, if they have valid monotheism and they affirm the divine attributes and don't break them in any way, I guess I would.
So I don't question for you on that, because we were asking Eric the same thing. What do you make of the Nostra Aetate, that same passage about the Hindus, where it says that they take a flight?
Before we move on to that, do you want to finish off with the Romans, just so we don't get
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question is how can you have? But I feel like you guys are just saying what I'm saying though. How can you have zeal for God, but not refer to God? It seems like in other words, I'm saying it seems like that verse is saying that the zeal of the Jews who are rejecting Christ, and sure, okay, maybe it's more clear cut for the Muslims, but I don't think the Jew example is worthless. How can their zeal be ordered to God, but then they don't actually refer to God?
Well, sure. I mean, do you think that it's possible to intend to worship God but to commit idolatry? Like setting aside whether or not Jews or Muslims do that, but do you just think that that's like a possibility that you can be trying to worship God but you're accidentally committing idolatry?
Yeah, I think that's possible.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think that so long as you
possible. I don't think so. Yeah, that's possible.
Sure. Right. So I think as long as you concede that, then you're conceding that there can be situations in which you are, intending to worship God, and we would say hence the zeal, right? Or like in Javier's analogy, I'm intending to send this celebrity money. I have a zeal for the celebrity, but in fact, I'm not actually doing that. I'm sending the scammer money. Or in this situation, we would say that, they are, worshiping a false God.
So what I would say though is in that situation of sending money to the celebrity, I would say that's a situation or like an act versus a disposition to actually have zeal. So for example, the habitual, I'm gonna start using some, I guess, more scholastic words maybe, the habitual disposition of zeal towards God that the Jews have, I guess we agree on that, right? I would argue that's the same disposition that gets put into act when they actually go and worship God, whether it be in the first century when they denied the Trinity, right, or now, and I would argue the same thing for the Muslims. Whereas for this person who's sending money to a scammer, their zeal is for the celebrity, but it's not the same zeal that was put into act for this scammer. But there's no change. I mean, you'd have to prove that the disposition of the Jews, before going to the temple and making an act of worship, is different than their habitual disposition for God. And I guess I don't want to keep jumping around because I know, I mean, now you got to go, and I know we got to do super chats. But then I don't know if you guys saw my video, but I think 1 Corinthians 10 talks about, you know, pagan worship and how they offer to demons, and yet the Jewish priests in the temple offer to God, because that's kind of what St. Paul is implying there.
Right. And again, and I don't mean to like belabor the same point, but I do think, and as Javier pointed out, I do think that like it is not as clear cut, not only for the Jews, specifically for the Jews in the first century, because as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the integral aspects to our argument is that there is a difference between abstracting from a consideration of the Trinity, the triunity of God, and then rejecting, you know, the triunity as the object of worship. So,
I also go ahead and finish.
So yeah, just to conclude, so like if you are a Jew in the first century, right, and your Jesus is like revealing himself in this time, right? The gospel is this the fullness of time. The gospel is being spread initially. Yeah, I do think that that's fundamentally different from, you know, like a Talmudic Jew who is living now in the 21st century, who, you know, is now living past the fullness of time and then is rejecting the Trinity as their own object of worship. I don't know if you think that that's just a distinction without a difference. Like you can argue that, and I'm open to you know, hearing that out. But yeah, I'm inclined to think that that is a relevant difference, you know, in these passages.
Yeah, I guess I'll say my final thoughts, and if you guys want to have the last word on these verses, that's fine. I think that I understand the distinction. So for example, like people have brought up the example of Trypho dialoguing with Saint Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, and it seems like Trypho's kind of inquiring. So maybe he's not fully guilty of rejecting the Trinity, right? He's not. He can't. He's not formally guilty because he might not even have a full picture of the Trinity yet. The problem with that is that who is off? So 1 Corinthians 10, who is offering sacrifices in the temple? It's not your, you know, your average Israelite layman who lives afar off and only comes to Jerusalem once a year or a few times a year for the feasts, right? It's the priest. It's the priest who offers. Well, who crucified Jesus? It was the Pharisees, and it was the Sadducees. It was the priest as well. Who did Jesus tell? You know, your father is not Abraham, but the devil. Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. Like Jesus fully expected them 20-something years before 1 Corinthians was written to recognize him as God, and he held them accountable. Like it's very clear, especially from the Gospel of John, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, which were priests, some of the Sadducees, most of the Sadducees, it's very clear that Jesus expected them to know that he was God from his miracles, from his preaching, right? Like that's just literally the entire point of his ministry with regard to the Jews, and that's why they're guilty for rejecting his, you know, for many things, but rejecting his divinity. And so the same people who crucified him 20 years later, who are in Jerusalem, we know that the apostles mostly, you know, they mostly made their moves in Jerusalem. That's like where their headquarters was, especially with St. James, the Bishop of Jerusalem. I don't think it's accurate to say that 20 years ago when Jesus was here, he held us accountable for denying his divinity, for not worshiping him as God. But now 20 years later, we're less culpable because we might not have that, right? It's the Jewish priests offering this sacrifice in Jerusalem that St. Paul is talking about. And yet the object of sacrifice there is still God, not the demons like the pagans. So I guess those are my closing thoughts. I think it's inconsistent. And Ben from Cleave to Antiquity kind of pulled this on me, which I was a little confused, because he said, yeah, the Jews in 1 Corinthians 10 are not culpable for rejecting the Trinity because they don't have a full formal idea of the Trinity. But then he also appealed to like John chapter 8 when Jesus says that, you know, your father is the devil, not Abraham. So it's like, were they guilty of rejecting Christ's divinity or were they not? You know what I mean? In the time of the New Testament. But those are my closing thoughts.
Sure. If I can give some closing thoughts there as well, and I don't know if you have to go, or if you don't, that's totally fine. We can move on to something else.
My family waiting on me, but 5 minutes should be good.
Sure. I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, I would say something that might be an interesting, and I'm just spitballing here. I would have to sit down and think about this more. Something that might be again another difference when it comes to like looking at the Muslim case versus the Jewish case post-Christ is that the temple was originally set up following God's instructions. It was ordered by God toward sacrifices toward him, where he's the object here. And so I think maybe due to those extenuating circumstances, one might be able to say that the Jews in that instance, even though their sacrifices are not being accepted, surely because Christ has already come, they do have actually the same referent in the context of the temple, following the instructions that God gave them in the temple, where he is the referent at the center of those instructions. I think that might be a bit of an extenuating circumstance for them, where it might preserve the referent. Whereas the Muslim, I just think, is really clear cut. Like, they just have a completely different situation going on, whether it's a case of a figment of Muhammad's imagination, or whether it's a demonic entity that is communicating with him, or what have you. I think that one's probably a much more clear cut case. But yeah, those are my final thoughts. I don't know if Samuel or Josh, if you guys have any final thoughts on that.
I do. Unfortunately, like, these will probably be things that would need to be like another follow-up video, because I think there's other things like you accepted that they could still have the right referent or object and still enter into idolatry. I'd say, that happens in Exodus 32, like we brought up before you came on. And then Hosea 3:5 and passages would also matter here, where, the image of the Old Testament is always the Lord and his Messiah are the ones that are coming in this redemptive act in the future. And Hosea 3:5 is pretty plain on it. They will turn to the Lord and his Prince David, or King David, depending on how it's translating. That's clearly referencing the future David to come. So I think there's clear references to, like, once they reject him, there's going to be big problems. Daniel predicts the destruction of the Second Temple. When you read Josephus and his Antiquities, or some of the Talmudic accounts, they account how after Jesus died, they don't say that, but the right time frame, weird things start happening at the temple, and it becomes clear that the sacrifices aren't being accepted. So there's clearly a shift there for them. And I think there is a strong indicator that, when Paul starts talking in Romans 11, they have been removed because they do not have faith. That seems to be a pretty harsh condemnation. I think that speaks clearly to what's going on there. And of course, they can be grafted back in. But for me, the biggest scripture that comes to mind is like 1 John 2:22 through 23. And I mean, 18 through 23 plays into that too. This is going from memory, so if I get some of this wrong, don't hurt me. This is the end. So now that you've heard Antichrist has come, many Antichrists have come. So now I'm writing to you to let them know these people who are leaving us were never of us. These false Antichrists have risen. I'm writing you not because you do not have the truth, but because you have it, and you can't let lies be part of your communion here. And who is a liar except those who deny Christ? He surely is Antichrist, and he who does not have the Father does not have the Son, and vice versa. So I think that speaks a lot here. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be like a different video. Because we all gotta go.
Kevin, I know you have to run because we're keeping you from your family. but go ahead. Any final words, Kevin, before we let you go?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. This was great. And hopefully, you guys can come on for my 5,000 subscriber, maybe a month or 2 months, who knows. But and Javier, I mean, we were talking at the DM. I mean, probably gonna come back soon on your channel anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're talking about Sola Scriptura and stuff. So yeah, God bless, guys. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, Kevin. Everybody, feel free to check out Since 33's channel if you want to get a deeper look at Roman Catholic apologetics that are more nuanced and are a little bit less on the pop side. So thanks again, Kevin.
Hey, guys. God bless.
All right, guys. Well, hey, before we go ahead and close out the stream, guys, is there anything else that you guys want to add about this topic? If you guys are still watching this, we have 38 people watching right now, which, dang, thanks, guys, for sticking around almost 3 hours. For those of you that have been here, if you have any final super chat questions or anything, make sure to put those in the chat. Josh, anything else you want to add? An argument you would want to bring up, a scripture you want to bring up, anything like that?
I definitely want to see how more Roman Catholics will engage 1 John 2:18 through 23 and Exodus 32 as that came up. That I actually really wish we could have continued that discussion. I'd also like to see Since 33 talk with Joe Heschmeyer or others of like, how is it that we aren't giving external latria to God, but yet it was said that the Muslims were giving latria to God without distinction in the text. I would be curious to hear them have that dialogue.
Yeah.
So
one of the things I appreciate a lot about Since 33, and that's actually the reason hopefully we're going to have him on soon to talk about Sola Scriptura, is hopefully we'll see, Lord willing, we're going to do a video with him where, along with him, a Roman Catholic apologist, we debunk all the pop Catholic talking points against Sola Scriptura, and then he's going to give us some of his more nuanced arguments against it, and we're going to have a nice conversation there. So he does a good job, I think, being honest when there's just bad argumentation from his side for the most part. I'm glad that he was able to say that. Yes, that's like a pretty bad argument when the unnuanced version gets thrown out there by whether it's Joe Heschmeyer or somebody else. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it's like
Samuel, anything you want to add as well?
No, I feel like we communicated our points like fairly well throughout the discussion. I think that to summarize, the most important points of emphasis, and you guys can tell me if you agree with this, is just that there is a difference between abstracting from a consideration of the Trinity and then denying the Trinity as your own referent. And I said this a few times throughout the stream, but we have to take into consideration not only what the Roman Catholics say about the Muslims, but what the Muslims say about their own act of worship, right? And as Javier showed when he pulled up these verses from their own holy text, it's like they're saying that God is not triune, right? And I do think that this is relevant to whether or not they are worshiping God, because as Cameron pointed out, we're working from a causal definition, right? We're asking, what created the universe? And if one party says, well, it is this triune God, and another party says it is not that triune God who created the universe, well, even though we both agree that God is that which created the universe, nevertheless, it does seem like we're diverging in our referent, right? In the same way that Javier pointed out in his investigation analogy. So I don't want to belabor that point. I brought it up plenty of times, but I just do think that that is the fundamental consideration, like whether or not the referent can remain the same, even when this kind of like, even when you are rejecting, right? Not leaving out of consideration, but, rejecting, an essential aspect of that reference identity. Yeah, but I digress.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I think that was a good sum up. Josh, you want to say something?
I would say, yeah, I just point out, like, your crime analogy is like the perfect analogy, but when they bring up the bar analogy, just be like, we're just debating that they're not pointing at the same guy. They're pointing at someone else in the bar. It's just a different man.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's a good point. And again, it gets complicated because then they'll want to, and we saw that with some of the chatters in the chat here, that they want to then throw out our, traveling back in time to see Jesus on the cross, pointing to him and saying, we worship him. Do you Muslims do the same thing? And they would say no. And they want to say, no, see, but you're pointing at the person of the Son. You're not pointing at the divine essence. I'm like, well, but then for that reason, then your bar analogy falls apart then.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, we're literally replicating the bar analogy, and you're saying it doesn't work. So it's like, so that should tell us that there's something weird about the way that they're using that analogy. But Zach asks, are you all Protestant? Yes. So in fact, I think the entire panel outside of our two Roman Catholic friends were Lutheran, except for Josh. Josh of Practical Christian Lessons is a Methodist.
It's only a matter of time.
Yeah. It's only a matter of time.
Lutheran is number 2 on my list.
Of Lutheranism. Yeah. If you guys want to start a "Come Home to Wittenberg" chain in the comments, that would be.
Yes. And Javier, I will say I was trying to be so charitable by calling our interlocutors today Roman Catholics, which is not my preferred designator. So, but I was trying to be ecumenical there. So there we go. I wasn't being the typical Lutherans, who are typically not known for playing nice. But I refrained from calling our kind friends, Papists today and Romanists, and
Well, and by the way, it's funny you mentioned that. People can keep an eye out for this. I'm going to try to get it recorded sometime next week. I'll try to put together a relatively short video. We'll see. I say short, and then my videos end up being like half an hour. But I'll put together what I hope will be a short video discussing the question, why do we call our Roman Catholic friends Roman Catholic instead of just Catholic? Is that an anti-Catholic slur, as some apologists would like to make you believe? Or is that something which, spoiler alert, their own magisterial documents utilize? So we'll talk about that in a video I have coming up next. Final thoughts, gentlemen. Anything you guys want to plug? Anything you want to say before we head out?
Subscribe to Scholastic Lutherans. Make sure to check out the content that we have over there. Cameron was on earlier, but I was sent to be our representative. Besides that, you can find me on Twitter. My tag is at @logos_asarkos, which means, which is so ironic, just to give a little bit of a rant. I remember when I first made my Twitter handle, I was just learning about theology, and I had just learned this theological term, the logos asarkos, or the logos asarkos, which means, the word without flesh, without sarkos, flesh. And I just thought that phrase sounded cool, and I was like, that's a cool theological term, and I just made that my tag. But what's so ironic is that the entire Lutheran tradition is about the logos and sarkos in the flesh, like the incarnate Christ. That is like the cornerstone of Lutheran theology. Luther has so many quotes to the effect of like, I don't want God without the human nature. I need Christ to be presented to me in the flesh. So that's just a little bit of irony, but that's how you can remember it, at logos_asarkos. You can find me on Twitter. I make content there, posting quotes from Gerhard, Quenstead, the Lutheran Scholastics. But yeah, thank you, Javier, for having me on today.
Yeah, awesome. And Josh, anything else you want to plug?
You can find me pretty much everywhere under PCL or Practical Christian Lessons, at least anywhere I'm on. Of course, subscribe to Javier. If you haven't done that already, hit the like button, hit the bell button. See, I'm your own personal ad here. But no, check out the people who were on earlier. I actually really hope they come back and watch that end and like make more videos on the stuff I brought up, because I would love to hear their takes on it and hear them engage that further. That's all for me.
Absolutely. And real quick before we go, I want to show people, I think it'd be a nice fitting way to finish as we're talking about our Roman Catholic friends. Oh, we have another super chat. It says, this is scary stuff. The things in Vatican II basically giving platform to Unitarians. Dark times, brothers. We have to unite and fight this. Yeah, I agree. I think this is obviously a big, and it's all of us would. I think it's a big theological mistake, and a big mistake when it comes to evangelism as well, to tell religions who are following demons or false gods that they're following the true God. So I thought we'd finish, since we've talked a lot about Vatican II. We had some Roman Catholic interlocutors come up. I thought it might be fitting to finish with a couple of quotes from Martin Luther on this issue. And so I got a couple for us here. Luther says in his commentary on Psalm, I believe it's 121, he says, after God has revealed himself in the man Christ, we rightly ask and believe that all those who do not take hold of this man born of Mary cannot take hold of God in general, but rather that they cannot take hold of God in heaven. Although they say that they believe in God, the creator of heaven and earth, they in fact believe in an idol of their heart, because apart from Christ, there is no true God. Great quote from Luther. I have a couple more here, and then we can close out. And this is the noblest article of our Christian faith, that the Son is eternal, true God, and also true man, and sent into the world to save it, which article nullifies the Jews, Turks, and all other faiths who forsake the Son and worship another God and seek help elsewhere. And then I think I'll finish up with this quote. Luther says this, in these sayings, and he cites a bunch of verses, the one refers to the other, the Father to the Son, and the Son to the Father, so that it cannot be doubtful to us that this King is true, right, natural God. And if you do not worship and accept this King, God cannot be served. For the Father and the Son are one. In vain, therefore, is it that the Turk dwells on his thoughts of God apart from Christ. For the Turk says that he worships God who made heaven and earth. The Jew says the same, but because both deny that Christ is the Son of God, they not only lack God, but also worship an idol. So, anywho, guys, I believe that will probably be it. I was trying to see if there's anything else that
on that point, really quick, if you don't mind me making another comment. We spent pretty much the entire stream debating whether or not the object of worship is the same. But I do think that a relevant consideration, perhaps for a future stream or another video, would be on the verb worship. Because even if we concede, for the sake of argument, that both Jews and Muslims have the right object of worship, it doesn't necessarily follow that they are worshiping. And if you look at what the Book of Concord has to say, it basically defines worship as the spiritual sacrifices that we offer to God. So we could think about the words of our Lord when he says that the hour is coming when the true worshipers of God will worship in spirit and in truth. And then later on in the New Testament, that spiritual worship is defined as the spiritual sacrifices that we offer to God, praise and thanksgiving. But all of that stems from faith. You cannot offer spiritual sacrifices to God, sacrifices of thanksgiving and prayer, without faith. And as we know, faith is in the person of Jesus Christ. So I do think that there is a relevant argument to bring up, which is to say that the claims of the same referent are not only dubious, but also of the act itself. And I know that the Roman Catholics will want to draw a distinction between efficacious and non-efficacious worship, or salvific or non-salvific worship. But I'm not entirely sure whether or not that is a valid category. Like, is there such thing as non-efficacious worship, or would we just call that idolatry? So don't quote me on that last part. But again, I just do think that that is a worthwhile consideration that perhaps it would be good to explore.
Yeah, and let's finish up with this, since you mentioned that, Samuel. When it comes to worship, guys, for anyone who's here who is not a Lutheran, Samuel and I being Lutherans, we affirm, obviously, the scriptures as the sole infallible rule of faith for the church, and we believe they're fully inspired. And then we have our book of confessions that we don't believe, right? It's not like a Book of Mormon, like it's an additional thing. It just, the Book of Concord, the collection of Lutheran confessions, simply set forth in a very well-written manner what we believe about God's revelation in Scripture. And so here in Martin Luther's Large Catechism, which is meant to instruct people that are both new to the faith or have been in the faith for a long time, he goes through all the commandments. He goes through the Lord's Prayer, and he goes through the Apostles' Creed and talks about what they all mean. If you ever, I want to say this, please, everybody at home, if you ever have Roman Catholics try to sell you on like Luther doesn't care about the commandments, sola fide, pull up Large Catechism for free online and just read the section of the commandments. But here's what he says about the first commandment: "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." That is, thou shalt have and worship me alone as thy God. What is the force of this, and how is it to be understood? What does it mean to have a God? Or what is God? A God means that from which we are to expect all good, into which we are to take refuge in all distress. So that to have a God is nothing else than to trust and believe him from the whole heart, as I have often said that the confidence and faith of the heart alone make both God and an idol. If your faith and trust be right, then is your God also true. And on the other hand, if your trust be false and wrong, then you have not the true God, for these two belong together, faith and God. That now, I say, upon which you set your heart and put your trust, is properly your God. So I want to close out with that, guys. If you're at home and you're anxious about the claims of Roman Catholicism, if you're trying to figure out, or maybe you're a Muslim, or maybe you're curious about Christianity, you're listening to this, we would just implore you, put your faith, your hope, the confidence of your whole heart, put that on the Lord Jesus Christ. Trust on him. Give your salvation over to him. Trust that he's not looking to damn you on a technicality, that he's not looking to do anything else, but have you trust in him. Give your heart, give your confidence, give that, not just all your desires, but as Luther says, right? Expecting all good things, okay? The only one that should have that place in your heart is the Lord Jesus Christ, and the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Give that to him. Do not give that to anything else. So,
Amen.
All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you once again, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Josh, for joining. We should do more streams like this. This was really fun. We should all try to do something like this more. And thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see you guys next time.